I shall be crowned king. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction. So please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter. And if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 7655 Borelman Street. As Anson led Lisa away from Clovis Cathedral, he carried a brand new briefcase. Although he had really wanted to exchange Ludwig's check for 1,000 gold coins, reason told him it was practically a 500-kilogram small mountain of gold. He could roll around in it if he carried it all. Fortunately, the concept of paper money had emerged in the year 100 of the Saints' calendar, spreading to every town and village along with the doctrines and reputation of the Church of Order. These small, fragrant, light, and rustling pieces of paper possessed the same allure as real gold and silver. In this respect, while both the Church of Order and the Old Gods, a certain underground evil organization, offered spiritual comfort, although one's methods were rather bizarre, the difference between them far exceeded the spiritual realm. In terms of its audience, the Ring of Order is the official faith of multiple kingdoms and duchies, endorsed by dozens, even hundreds, of the most powerful royal and noble families in the Order world, and accepted by the majority of the lower classes. In terms of resources, the Church has the right to levy tithes on the entire Order world and is also the world's largest financial institution. And its manpower is even more immense, not to mention that every newborn and baptized child is a believer in the Ring of Order according to doctrine. Just the number of employees in its churches scattered throughout the world exceeds that of any existing nation or organization. As a spellcaster preparing to work for some underground evil organization, Anson felt his future was filled with light whenever he thought about these things, a light so bright it was blinding. Sitting in a casually hailed horse-drawn carriage, Anson and Lisa set off from Red Brick Street, rounded 3 major intersections, and stopped under a gaslight near White Lake Park. Despite being called a park, on the map of Clovis City's inner city, this area comprised a medium-sized market, a residential community, 2 commercial streets, and a large area. This place is a bit far from the true city center of Clovis, but very close to the Red Brick Street where Clovis Cathedral is located. Transportation is convenient, and prices aren't high. A carriage ride from here takes only 10 minutes to St. Isaac's College, making it a popular spot for students to hang out. Former Anson has more than one memory of getting drunk here and lying in the street, being chased by the Royal Guard. Good security, slightly expensive, and not far from St. Isaac's College and Clovis Cathedral. Draco Veltz, that guy really knows everything about me. Anson, silently rolling his eyes, took Lisa's hand, who was still looking around, and after asking a few passers-by for directions, headed towards the address on the postcard, following former Anson's memory. 55 Bullen Street, left side of the cafe. Glancing at the bustling cafe beside him, Anson muttered to himself, put away the postcard, grabbed the copper knocker on the door, and banged on it forcefully. Knock, knock, knock. Were you introduced by Viscount Borner? Beside the warm fireplace, an elderly woman draped in a dark purple blanket was curled up in a leather sofa, her slightly cloudy eyes darting across her wrinkled, pale skin. That guy who deserves to go to hell is still alive. Anson, unsure how to respond, forced a smile and gave the old woman a slight smirk. We don't really know each other, we only met once on the train. I think only that guy knows about renting out a house, so you must have been introduced by Viscount Borner, the old woman said with an unquestionable tone. She tugged at the blanket, her cloudy eyes fixed on Anson with the eagerness of someone eyeing prey. Tell me, what did that guy who deserves to go to hell say to you? What did he say? How would I know what that old nobleman and that novelist said? Anson chuckled softly and said, convenient transportation, good security, fully furnished from fireplace to kitchen and bathroom. It's the best choice for newcomers like us who have just arrived in Clovis. This explanation made the old woman narrow her eyes slightly, but the next second, the slight upturn of her lips turned into a cold snort. TCH. He deserves to go to hell, even cheating people he just met. I guess he probably didn't tell you that the rent for this house is a full fifth more expensive than the surrounding area, plus the cost of a security company, and you have to pay at least 6 months rent up front. Right? No, Viscount Borner told us. Anson shook his head and chuckled. After careful consideration, We think that in such a convenient community as White Lake Park, a rent increase of only a fifth is very worthwhile." Before he could finish speaking, he noticed that the impatient old woman had already shifted her gaze from him to Lisa, who was sitting to the side eating snacks at the coffee table. Looking at the mess on the table and the empty dessert plate, Anson felt his lips twitch again. "Little girl, what do you think, huh?" Lisa, her mouth full of crumbs, suddenly looked up, eyeing the old woman warily. "I'm asking you, what do you think of this house?" Lisa blinked, looking at the old woman with confusion and bewilderment, then at Anson, and remained silent. But the old woman was unusually persistent, her cloudy eyes revealing an extraordinary determination as she awaited Lisa's answer. This silence lasted a full half-minute. After thinking for a while, Lisa looked at her with a very serious gaze. "The cookies are delicious." This seemingly irrelevant answer brought a satisfied smile to the old woman's face, her thin lips curving upwards. "All right, I can rent it to you, but you still need to pay 6 months rent up front, plus the security company's fee, for a total of 700 silver coins." The old woman, having withdrawn her gaze, snorted coldly at Anson. "I want cash, that's 35 gold coins." After quickly calculating the gold-silver exchange rate in Clovis, Anson nodded. "No problem. Are you an officer?" The old woman looked Anson up and down with some surprise. "In my memory, I don't think any officer has ever been this generous. I recently made a small fortune," Anson said casually. The old woman frowned, glancing at Lisa beside her with concern out of the corner of her eye. Her thin lips parted slightly. "Young woman, if you're your age and still have some inheritance, you should spend it on investments rather than on enjoyment. Contract a conscripted infantry regiment or buy some profitable stocks. Even if you don't think about yourself, you should think about your family." I know that many young people these days would rather scrimp and save to buy a luxurious apartment or rent a high-end hotel room long-term, as if that would elevate their social class, but in reality, when they get old, they have nothing left but an empty house. Anson listened silently to the old woman's rambling, a smile on his face, as if he could already see her in her youth. Right now, I highly recommend you invest in those security companies. It's the most profitable business in Clovis." The old woman tugged at her thin blanket, as if the fireplace wasn't warm enough. "Just walk around the streets and neighborhoods with a rifle, and the profits will be considerable over a year, especially on our Bauman Street. It's always been exceptionally safe." Boom. Chapter 77 The Good-Natured Security Company. Almost the instant the old woman finished speaking, a deafening roar erupted from below, shaking the entire living room. Unusually quiet. Anson's expression was odd as he watched the thick black smoke drifting past a window. "Well, it can be a little noisy sometimes, just sometimes," the old woman said nonchalantly, clutching her thin blanket tightly, sinking deeper into the sofa. "These days, those mechanical devices, gas systems, and stuff, aren't as sturdy or reliable as they were decades ago. The ground floor of Bauman Street is full of shops, and the merchants love cheap goods, so a little commotion is nothing unusual." Boom. 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 Explosions rang out again, the tower in flames accompanied by screams from pedestrians and cries of the injured. Muddy sewage and garbage were sent into the air, only to fall back to the ground with the dust. Lisa, constantly being jostled by the shaking of the building, danced excitedly on the sofa, just like she had on her first roller coaster ride. A little commotion. Anson turned to look at the old woman, pointing with his raised right hand at the cafe door that had been blown into the air outside the window. "Don't make such a fuss, young man. You're an army officer." The old woman curled her lip dismissively, wrapping her thin blanket tighter around herself. "Compared to the rifles and cannons on the battlefield, this little commotion is nothing." "No, I think you might have some misunderstandings about the battlefield." Anson was about to say something when he was interrupted again by the tremors coming from downstairs. "Thugs. It's thugs, run." Another explosion. "Don't hurt me. I really don't have any money, my leg. My leg. Oh no. Don't run, you thief, that's my wallet." Fire department. Someone go and call the community fire department. As if these commotions weren't enough, the chaotic Bullen Street, ravaged by explosions and thick smoke, was filled with shouts of panic and commotion. You probably haven't been able to use gas for a while now." Looking at the increasingly thick black smoke outside, the old woman muttered, "This might be a bit of a hassle, but young people should learn from their hardships. It'll save them a lot of money. Gas on Bauman Street isn't cheap." "No, I think what we should be most worried about right now isn't the gas, But how long this house can last? Another sound followed, and Anson, his body vibrating with the sofa, took a deep breath, trying to make his tone sound as calm as possible. I heard there's a security company near Bowman Street that rents services to both residents and shops. That's right, the Good Guys Security Company, well-equipped, well-trained, courteous, and most importantly, very cheap. Each resident only needs to pay 300 silver coins a year to enjoy their services. The old woman nodded, her expression no longer as harsh as before. They have many former officers and retired soldiers in their company. If you retire in the future, you can consider working there. I heard their benefits are quite good, and they're all as dedicated as regular soldiers. You must have bought a lot of stock in that company, Anson thought to himself with a forced smile. Soon, just a few minutes after the old woman finished speaking, sirens similar to those at a steam train station blared along Bowman Street. Several heavy horse-drawn carriages resembling those of the Imperial Guard blocked the intersection, and dozens of good-natured security guards in red and blue uniforms and tricorn hats, carrying muzzle-loading rifles, filed in from both ends of the street in neat formation. However, they neither maintained order among the rioting crowd nor immediately rushed towards the still-burning cafe, but instead blocked off the entire street nearby. Almost half a company of security guards split into two teams, forming a line formation one in front of the other, blocking off the riot area in the center of the street. "Attention, line up!" A loud shout rang out in the street below, instantly giving Anson a strange sense of familiarity. "Ready, fire!" Bang! A uniform volley of gunfire was fired into the sky. In the blink of an eye, acrid smoke filled the entire street, and the restless screams and chaos immediately subsided. The crowd, who had just been screaming and running around, immediately came to their senses, watching nervously as the street security guards, who had already completed their second round of reloading, moved with practiced ease. Their disciplined movements and striking uniforms possessed an indescribable intimidating power. That was just a warning, everyone, remain calm. Stand still. We, the Good Guys Security Company, will never harm any innocent citizen of the kingdom. Please remain calm. All citizens of the kingdom with identification or a guarantor's signature, please leave the street in an orderly fashion from both sides. The rest of you, stay put. We have already reported to the Royal Guard. Please remain calm and do not leave the scene until they take over, stabilizing emotions, controlling the scene, evacuating unrelated crowds. Indeed, they were well trained. Watching the gradually calming street security, Anson raised an eyebrow in slight surprise. But why wasn't anyone going to put out the fire at the cafe? How is it? The old woman, curled up on the sofa, smiled at Anson. Hiring this security company was my idea. At first, quite a few residents were reluctant. After all, 300 silver coins a year isn't cheap, but now everyone sees the benefits. Having such a group of professionals can save everyone a lot of trouble. If you encounter a thief or robbery, you can entrust it to them. It's much more efficient and cheaper than hiring some amateur private investigators. That's right, it certainly seems so, Anson casually agreed. But there are at least several hundred households and shops on this street. Is it really that easy to get everyone to pay voluntarily? I mean, there will always be one or two households that drag their feet and don't pay, right? If that's the case. Before the old woman could speak, the security guard's shouts rang out from downstairs again. Old John's Cafe has been in arrears on its commissions with our company for a long time, and has been rude to the salesperson who came to persuade them, even using excessive violence. Today's accident is the most severe punishment the Ring of Order can give to such dishonest behavior. In addition, we have received intelligence that the cafe was suspected of entertaining followers of the old gods, and we have handed over the evidence and leads to the Royal Guard. An investigation will begin soon. All law-abiding citizens of the kingdom and residents of Bowman Street, please take this as a warning. The old woman gazing out the window paused, then turned to Anson. Yes, these things happen occasionally, Anson. I guess you don't want to rent this place anymore, right? Can you give me a discount? Chapter 78 Clues. After a brief round of haggling, Anson successfully reduced the rent for 6 months from 700 silver coins to 600, including the 6-month commission for the Good Guys Security Company, a relatively reasonable apartment price near White Lake Park. When Anson deftly pulled 15 gold coin notes from his pocket, he was quite certain he saw an undisguised look of disdain in the old woman's eyes. It was almost like looking at a spendthrift squandering his inheritance. Despite her somewhat harsh demeanor and lack of kindness towards Anson, her tenant, even though she seemed particularly fond of Lisa. After signing the lease, the old woman prepared a dinner. Garlic sausage, braised pork knuckle, dry bread, and a vegetable soup made with tomatoes, bean sprouts, and water spinach. It looked simple yet delicious, especially the vegetable soup, which was completely different from what the two had eaten in the military camp. Seeing Lisa practically licking the bowl clean, Anson assumed it was because of the cream in the soup. By the time the old woman got up and left, it was already past midnight. Lisa, her cheeks bulging from eating, fell asleep on the dining table. After cleaning up the mess and settling Lisa in bed, Anson, sprawled on the sofa, too exhausted to move, finally turned his gaze to Draco's briefcase. His reward? Inside was all the evidence the Royal Guard had prepared for blackmail, including evidence of Old God's factions within the conscripted forces during the siege of Thunder Keep. Hesitating for a second, Anson finally opened the briefcase. Having witnessed Draco's observational skills firsthand, he was curious about what kind of clues the man had gathered that made the Royal Guard so terrified of a seemingly insignificant novelist, even going so far as to dispatch a dozen elite Royal Guard soldiers and a bloodline-powered individual, willing to abandon their plans to capture him. Click, a soft, crisp sound, and the briefcase lock opened. Inside were, bricks? Oh, and a very old-looking diary. Anson let out a long sigh of relief, a hint of emotion in his voice. He hadn't expected that seemingly frivolous fellow was actually a serious person who liked to keep a diary. Just like himself. In a cheerful mood, Anson retrieved the diary from the pile of bricks and began to peruse it by the firelight of the fireplace. Just as Draco had mentioned, the diary contained mostly copied and collected information about the Janissaries' attempts to extort or bribe Privy Council members and certain ministers. The contents were incredibly detailed, down to the exact times of their private meetings and departures, the duration and general content of their conversations, the accounts used for bribery, and the banks where those accounts were registered, all meticulously recorded. Even the private correspondence was photocopied in dark ink. Initially just curious, Anson began to feel a chill run down his spine after flipping through a few pages. This wasn't just a clue. It was the Janissaries themselves piling up all the evidence that could lead to their capture and stuffing it directly into the novelist's hands. According to Draco, he only discovered the unexpected death of his family 2 months ago after receiving a job offer from the Crovey Truth newspaper, and began plotting revenge against the Royal Guard. In other words, he uncovered all the Royal Guard's clandestine activities in just 2 months. How is that possible? No, it seems quite possible. Recalling how the other party saw through his identity in just one meeting, Anson suddenly began to seriously doubt his own judgment. He was now a gifted individual who had awakened his bloodline power, yet he hadn't sensed any bloodline power reaction from Draco Veltz. Could it be that he was actually a spellcaster of the Old Gods? Only in darkness can light shine. Among the 3 Old Gods, the Dark Lord Mutter seemed to correspond to the attribute of peeping into secrets. If that were the case, then his concealment was incredibly skillful, revealing no flaws from beginning to end. He was the complete opposite of a certain seemingly low-key but actually high-profile dark mage. Anson, his pupils trembling slightly, continued flipping through the diary in his hands. Soon, he found what he was looking for. December 3rd, Mace Hornard appeared in Oaktown. Disguised as a low-ranking officer named John Ness, he approached Lieutenant Colonel Willen Small and infiltrated the conscription army as a quartermaster. December 25th, Mace Hornard appeared in Oaktown for the second time. After purchasing a third-class ticket, he left Oaktown and arrived at the Central West Station of the Royal Capital. Within the Thunder Fortress conscription army, there are suspected to be a second, or even more, Old Gods followers. January 1st, 100th year of the Saint calendar, Thunder Fortress fell, and Kroger Bernard disappeared. He was suspected of having contact with the Old Gods in 95th year of the Saint calendar and is suspected of being murdered. There is ample evidence that Mace Hornard, a professor of history at St. Isaac's College, has been receiving funding from a certain channel since the year 92 of the Saint calendar, operating a relatively secretive Old God organization in the capital. Its membership ranges from approximately 20 to 50 people, and it has been implicated in numerous major murder cases, with its main members mostly belonging to Snap. Anson, sitting in front of the fireplace, closed the diary gently, his expression somewhat dazed. The amount of information was overwhelming. If everything above was true, then Mace Hornard, the Black Mage's Old God organization, had actually been under the watchful eyes of the Royal Guard for a long time. their every move monitored. But according to the intelligence he overheard outside the compartment on the Iron Sky, it seemed that not many people within the Royal Guard knew about this. At least the captain probably didn't know, and the person with similar bloodline power was likely a high-ranking member within the Royal Guard. As someone who only inherited the memories of the former Anson but not his emotions, Anson was completely indifferent to the life or death of the Black Mage and his underground evil organization. But if the guards intended to use this organization as a breakthrough to blackmail Archbishop Franz and the Church of Order, his identity as a spellcaster would almost certainly be exposed. After all, an underground organization that doesn't betray its own people isn't a proper underground organization. And if he wanted to avoid being betrayed, the only solution was. A particularly practical thought quickly sprouted in Anson's mind. At the same time, Anson also refreshed his understanding of a certain novelist. His meeting with him was no coincidence, but rather something arranged by this guy from the very beginning. The reason he approached and lured him in such a risky way was because he knew very well that his interests were highly aligned with the guards. If he couldn't get himself out of the Black Mage's control as soon as possible, then a direct conflict with the guards was only a matter of time. I have a feeling we'll meet again soon. I hope that by then, we'll have both accomplished what we wanted to do. Recalling their words when they parted at the station, Anson's lips curled slightly. Looks like I need to find a way to meet with a respected history professor as soon as possible. Chapter 79 The Prisoners. Bang! A heavy iron fist slammed onto the sturdy conference table. Inside the guards' headquarters, shrouded in a dark atmosphere, dozens of officers sat upright on either side of the long table, utterly silent. The guard's commander, his fists clenched, half slung over the table. His rugged build and balding head gave him an imposing presence as he surveyed his subordinates with the sinister gaze of a wild beast surveying its prey. His loyal, dutiful, capable subordinates. And then? You failed, gentlemen. You went through so much trouble, made such a commotion, and now you're telling me you failed. No, 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 you didn't fail, because you didn't capture him, you didn't find his suitcase, you don't know where he escaped to, you don't know his general route. And you don't know what he's planning to do next. You know absolutely nothing. So now, who can tell me why? The trembling officers didn't dare utter a sound. They cautiously lowered their heads, glancing out of the corner of their eyes at their commander, driven to hysteria by the increasing amount of bad news. Besides fear, there was also a deep sense of grievance. The Central West Station of the capital was the largest steam train station in the inner city of Clovis, handling tens of thousands of people daily. Even mobilizing a regiment or a division to control everyone entering or leaving the station was a pipe dream, let alone capturing a completely insignificant novelist. Of course, no one dared to utter this reasonable explanation. The commander's roar continued, I warn you, we are at a critical juncture of life and death. The royal family has abandoned us, the Privy Council is pressing us relentlessly, and the Church of Order is standing by indifferently. We can't rely on anyone now, we can only rely on ourselves. And I really don't want to repeat myself 1,000 times here how deadly the information that damned novelist, Draco Veltz, possesses is to us. Capture him. Kill him. Shoot him. Hang him. I don't care what methods you use, or what you can achieve. 3 days, within 3 days I want to see this guy sitting before me, dead or alive, understand? Looking at the pairs of eyes that avoided his gaze, the enraged commander felt an endless fire of fury burning within him. Even though it was pointless. Bringing Draco Veltz back wouldn't immediately reverse the situation for the Royal Guard. Right now, the royal family needed to win the war against the Empire, which required the support of the Privy Council, composed of nobles and the wealthy, and the Church of Order, with its abundant cash and resources. The nobles, the wealthy, and even the Church desperately needed stable and good security in Clovis. As long as the security problems in the capital remained unresolved, the pressure on the Royal Guard would only intensify. The commander knew very well that he couldn't improve the capital's security at present. Therefore, his only option was to drag others down with him while diverting public attention, especially that of the Privy Council, as much as possible. He wanted to postpone the passage of the City Public Management Act, making the Privy Council and the royal family hesitant to act rashly due to the serious consequences of disbanding the Royal Guard, thus avoiding a complete breakdown in relations. Therefore, Draco Veltz had to die. Alright. Now is not the time for arguing and throwing tantrums. We must be pragmatic to prevent the Royal Guard from being disbanded. The commander, his anger slightly subsided, spoke in a powerful voice that echoed in everyone's ears. That damned novelist has obtained a lot of important intelligence, but he won't dare show his face unless he finds a suitable buyer. Until then, we're safe. So you clueless guys, tell me what else you know." The officers exchanged bewildered glances and remained silent for a long time before someone finally slowly raised their right hand. Our friends in the Privy Council secretly sent word that the Privy Council is preparing a new plan to reduce taxes for security companies in the capital, encouraging the industry's development, and Clovis Cathedral, after the Red Brick Street riot, is also applying to the Privy Council to establish a semi-independent guard force. Indeed a big problem. The commander nodded in satisfaction, gesturing for the officer who had spoken to sit down. "Notify our friends to delay the plan's passage as much as possible, but don't obstruct it too much. These security companies, though annoying, might actually be helpful to us in some ways. As for the Order Church, well, let them fend for themselves. Even if they have money, they don't have many qualified soldiers left. What else? We've obtained a passenger list from the Iron Sky, and a detailed record of the entire incident, including the cause of death of the 13 Royal Guard soldiers on the train, the signatures of all suspected participants, and everyone willing to testify for Draco Veltz." The commander, slightly frowning, took the record from his subordinate and vividly described the bizarre train murder case under a series of names. A low-ranking officer dissatisfied with his life, after obtaining the whereabouts and incriminating evidence against a former colleague, planned to blackmail him, but due to a series of unexpected events, it ultimately escalated into a mutual suicide murder, implicating more than a dozen colleagues who had no connection to the matter. It was basically an absurd lie, riddled with flaws, obviously fabricated to cover up the truth. But for some reason, this lie received the unanimous approval of nearly 100 passengers on the Iron Sky, including many nobles and wealthy merchants of high status, nobles even the Royal Guard tried to win over, who signed a statement to testify for this damned novelist. It was utterly absurd. Such a ridiculous and cliched novel only deserved to appear in the Clovey Truth newspaper. "What are you trying to say?" The commander, his expression grim, glanced at his subordinate. "I think we can start with those willing to testify for Draco Veltz," the officer said cautiously. "First, almost all of them are in the inner city of the capital and have legitimate identities, so finding them shouldn't be difficult. Second, if I were Draco Veltz, after obtaining such crucial evidence, I would certainly seek help from these people as well. Therefore, Your Excellency Commander, I believe we can secretly monitor the movements of those connected to Draco Veltz on the train, and it won't be difficult to find his whereabouts." Seeing his subordinate becoming increasingly agitated, the commander hesitated for a moment, then nodded slightly, a faint smile finally appearing on his usually menacing face, a smile more like a grimace. "Very good, this is a good suggestion. Gentlemen, you have something to do now, starting today. Act according to this list. For the sake of all our futures, you'd better show me some results as soon as possible." "Yes," a unified, angry shout rang out at the conference table, while countless eyes secretly glanced at the officer who had just spoken, their gazes filled with pity, like prisoners preparing to escape looking at the only fool still obediently serving his sentence. Chapter 80 Royal Military Academy. After a restless night, Anson ate some cold, dry bread to stave off his hunger, prepared breakfast for the still sleeping Lisa, put on his coat, and went out. Compared to Thundercastle, the winter in the capital was more gloomy. The thick fog that had appeared since dawn showed no sign of dissipating by 7:30 a.m. Snowflakes drifted down, turning into muddy pavement on the sewage-filled streets. The streets of Balmain were as calm as if nothing had happened that morning. Hurried pedestrians, slowly crawling carriages, shops of all sizes, children hawking fruit, flowers, and newspapers, all bustled with the noise from early morning. Everyone seemed to have forgotten the explosion and riot of the previous day, continuing their lives as usual, as if they had long since become accustomed to it all. The cafe was reduced to charred ruins after the explosion. 2 fully armed security guards stood outside the once bustling shop, and 2 slogans were painted in bright red on a wooden sign sealing the door. "Paying commissions on time is being responsible for your family. Participating in old gods' activities is seriously harmful to your health." How true. Looking at the 2 slogans on the sign, Anson, who had personal experience with them, didn't even know how to respond. "Oh dear, are you heading out?" A somewhat unfamiliar, sarcastic voice sounded behind Anson, deliberately raised a few octaves. "Leaving your young sister to clean and tidy the new house all by yourself, and going off to pursue your own future, quite the style of a new generation of elder brothers." Anson, stiffening, stopped and turned to look at the slightly cloudy eyes behind him. "Good morning. I didn't expect you to be up so early. I have to thank a certain gentleman who was pacing back and forth in the living room in the middle of the night, keeping this old man awake all night." The old woman gave a curt snort, wrapping the dark purple blanket around herself. "Are you heading out?" "Oh, going to Friedrichstrasse to take care of some business," Anson said, slightly embarrassed. Friedrichstrasse. The old woman leaning against the door paused for a moment, seemingly lost in thought, but quickly recovered. "There's a cafe on that street that sells good tobacco. If you're on your way back, remember to bring me some. In this awful weather, my bones ache terribly if I don't smoke." "No problem," Anson answered readily. "What brand?" "No need. Just tell them Mrs. Bogner wants it, and they'll understand." The old woman wrapped her thin blanket tighter around herself. "Oh, Mrs. Bogner wants it. Wait. Bogner." Anson looked at the old woman with some surprise. "You are Lady Borner, and Viscount Borner is my ex-husband." The old woman, with a smirk on her lips, sneered, "As a tenant, you didn't even know who the landlord was, and you just paid half a year's rent without knowing it. With such a careless brother like you, our little Lisa is really pitiful." All right, go and get busy with your future and career, young man." The impatient old woman waved her hands repeatedly. "I have to go make breakfast for my dear little Lisa, and teach this child how to take care of herself, lest one day her brother accidentally spends all her dowry." Bang! With a muffled sound, a bewildered Anson was slammed out of the door. An hour and a half later, the carriage slowly came to a stop on Friedrichstrasse. Feeling somewhat dejected, Anson walked through the 15-meter-high stone archway, his feet sinking into the fine sand under it. Towards the end of the sycamore-lined avenue, the headquarters building of the Royal Military Academy. Entering the building's lobby, he inquired about the room's location from the guard at registration. Standing before the office door, Anson straightened his clothes slightly, let out a long sigh, and gently knocked. "Come in." "Yes, sir," Anson responded, pushing open the door. A middle-aged man in a general's uniform, sitting upright behind a desk, came into view. "You are graduate of the 29th class of the Royal Military Academy, 93rd year of the Saints calendar." Anson glanced quickly at the nameplate on the table, then snapped to attention, pounding his chest with his right hand. "Anson Bach, officer cadet of the skirmisher department. Long live the king." Instructor Eric, his brow slightly furrowed, paused, instinctively rising to return the salute. "Eric Hero, instructor of the Royal Military Academy. Long live the king." Before he could finish, the instructor, suddenly realizing something, abruptly looked up. "Wait, you're Anson Bach?" "Yes." Seeing the other's seemingly stunned expression, Anson felt a sense of unease. "Is there a problem?" "What problem?" Instructor Eric, muttering to himself, wore a very strange expression, then waved his hand at Anson, hesitantly. "Okay, close the door and sit down. If you want something to drink, I have dark beer and rum." "Rum? Oh dear, I almost forgot you're from the army." "Then let's have dark beer." Anson quickly shut his mouth, turned and closed the door, then sat quietly in a chair. Bang! A muffled thud echoed as the instructor slammed a full glass of dark beer in front of Anson, then stared at him silently. This sudden turn of events made Anson feel uneasy. "Excuse me, Anson Bach. I really don't know what to say," Instructor Eric interrupted again, sounding quite conflicted. "As this academy and your former instructor, I'm proud of your achievements. I haven't seen the academy's records, but you should be the highest-ranking graduate in the school's history. But on the other hand, you've also created a huge problem for yourself. You know what I mean." Anson nodded slightly. "That brat Ludwig Franz, relying on his father to forcefully bypass the army and promote you from captain to lieutenant colonel, won the siege of Remmenberg, which no one expected to succeed. The army didn't dare do anything to the archbishop's son, so they could only take it out on you. The academy had already arranged a post-graduation position for you, as a temporary recruit instructor at a fortress in the eastern province, to be promoted to full-fledged instructor in 6 months and transferred to the rear service department. But now," Instructor Eric shook his head, but quickly changed the subject. "Let's not talk about that. You're here today because of your graduation certificate, right, and my officer's allowance." Anson nodded and said, "The people from the Order Church told me that the army didn't send the relevant documents to them, so I can't receive either my old or current rank's allowance. I need a certificate." This might be a bit troublesome, but I'll try my best to find a way." Instructor Eric frowned slightly. "Ah, thank you so much. It's nothing to thank me for. You're a student at the military academy. And it's my job to handle students' graduation and employment." At this point, Instructor Eric suddenly raised his glass and smiled at Anson. "Besides, you're from the skirmisher department, so of course we'll protect you as one of our own, huh?" A little dazed, Anson quickly raised his glass, clinked it with Instructor Eric's with a face full of gratitude, and drank it all in one gulp. "Your timing isn't ideal today, otherwise I could go find someone to issue you the certificate right now." Setting down his wine glass, Professor Eric said regretfully, "Because of the war with the Empire, a large number of documents and resumes that hadn't been transferred in time are piling up at the Academy. Everyone's incredibly busy, and we even have to find a way to borrow manpower from the Church Academy to help." "That's alright, I can wait for now." "Alright, leave your address, I'll send it to you directly once it's ready." After a few more pleasantries, Anson, having put down his wine glass, took out a pen and a piece of paper from his jacket pocket, a good habit of his, and handed Professor Eric his address at White Lake Park. Just as he was about to get up and leave, a familiar voice rang out from behind the door that was suddenly pushed open. "Anson." Chapter 81 May Shorn. Anson turned around and saw an elderly man with dark brown curly hair, slightly graying temples, and few wrinkles on his face standing by the door. He wore a black doctor's robe with red trim, and 2 books were tucked under his right arm, the heraldic records of the Kingdom of Clovis and the Life of Isaac Rand. At first glance, the man seemed unfamiliar. But the instant he turned his head, the hairs on the back of Anson's neck stood on end, and the 6-pointed star brand on his heart began to burn slightly, allowing Anson to make a quick judgment. He was the Dark Mage. The accelerating heartbeat propelled his blood, and an indescribable tightness and suffocation stimulated Anson, who was desperately trying to maintain his composure. If it were the former Anson in this situation, he would only show suppressed excitement, so he absolutely could not reveal the slightest bit of tension or fear. "Good morning, Professor Mace Hornard." Anson paused, a flicker of surprised joy crossing his face. "What are you doing here?" The kind-looking Mace Hornard smiled gently. "Street. Isaac's Academy received a letter of appeal from the Royal Military Academy, hoping the Academy could send some teachers skilled in paperwork and organization to assist. Coincidentally, due to the war, I had to cut short my planned vacation, and since I don't have many classes for the time being, I came here with some others to help." Almost as soon as Mace spoke, the burning pain in his heart quickly subsided. "Dear Anson Bach, when did you return?" "Yesterday at noon, on the Steel Sky steam train," Anson answered without hesitation, his slightly upturned lips unable to conceal his excitement. "After receiving your letter, I couldn't wait a moment longer, and I set off from Oaktown as soon as the war ended." Mace, with a serene expression, nodded slightly to Anson, saying nothing more. "Hey, wait a minute," Professor Eric suddenly spoke up, looking at the two of them with some surprise. "Professor and Anson, you know each other?" As soon as he finished speaking, Anson and Mace exchanged a glance and smiled in a very tacit manner. "Respected Instructor Eric, of course we know each other," Mace spoke softly, turning his gentle gaze to the still surprised Eric. "Before dear Anson Bach joined the Royal Army, he was one of my favorite students of all, in fact, perhaps the most talented, so you can imagine how disappointed I was when I learned he had been taken by the military academy. His talent in history and geography far exceeded his value as an officer." Eric looked at the two of them with surprise, then smiled. "But now you can rest assured, your good student has proven his military talent with action, capturing the heavily fortified and well-supplied Thunder Fortress in just 19 days. Such an outstanding achievement is enough to make him a candidate for teaching material at the military academy, heavily fortified, well-supplied." For some reason, Anson felt an urge to laugh whenever he heard those 2 words. "That seems so, but it's still a pity," Mace Hornard sighed, looking at Ehrlich with a slightly pleading gaze. "Excuse me, could I have a few minutes of your time? We haven't seen each other in a long time and would like to find a place to talk." "No problem, you can take our great hero of Thunderberg away now." Ehrlich nodded readily with a smile, then turned to Anson. "I will send you the diploma and supporting documents as soon as possible, don't worry." "Thank you." After thanking Professor Ehrlich once again, Anson turned around and followed the gentle-faced Professor Mace Hornard out of the office. "You did a good job." In the quiet corridor of the building, Mace Hornard, who was walking in front of Anson, spoke out without warning. "Professor." Anson was slightly surprised and about to say something when he was interrupted by the other party raising his hand. "Don't worry, they can't hear me," Mace Hornard said confidently. I've been to this building a few times before, and no one has ever been able to identify us without warning. Professor, you probably don't know that a talkative novelist has thoroughly investigated you. Well, me too. Anson, following closely behind, desperately suppressed the thoughts that kept popping up in his mind. You did a great job in the Siege of Thunder Keep. Very well, completely exceeding my expectations. Of course, the severity of the problem also far exceeded my initial expectations. Just as Anson was lost in thought, Mace Harnard continued, the old gods faction of the Grand Duchy of Edland actually developed the heir of the duchy into believers of the true god, attempting to overthrow the government of the Grand Duchy of Edland through coercion, and even trying to obtain the secret of immortality from the ruins of Thunder Keep. What a bunch of madmen. It is because of these madmen who never know how to think rationally that the grand plan of the old gods' revival has been exposed prematurely time and time again, causing the plan to fail and half-turned in a miserable way. Mace Harnard roared with a peaceful expression, his helpless indignation completely consistent with when the two met before. Fortunately, my dear fellow Anson Bach, thanks to your presence, we were able to stop the damage in time and prevent the old gods from being exposed to the Church of Order. Such a courageous and wise act must be rewarded. As he finished speaking, Mace Harnard suddenly stopped and looked at Anson, who was slightly stunned and looked somewhat frightened, with incredibly kind eyes. No, Professor, you're too kind. Forcing a smile, Anson said with utmost trepidation, as a believer in the true gods, these are the bare minimum. Smiling, Mace Harnard interrupted him, raising his right index finger. A courageous and wise act must be rewarded. The great three old gods will never neglect believers who dedicate themselves to the grand plan, and only by gaining more power can one better serve the rise of the entire old god faction, uncover the true history, and make those blasphemers who have altered the world's memory pay the price they deserve. Under the other's gaze, Anson let out a long sigh and lowered his head, revealing a hint of shame. I'm sorry, Professor, I was too shallow. No, my dear Anson Bach. You are too humble. It's a noble and beautiful quality, but sometimes it can make one hesitate. Mace Harnard gently patted Anson's shoulder. It seems that war, like a library, has the power to shape souls, turning a once passionate and impassioned young man into someone so mature and composed. Only in this way can I confidently entrust you with your next mission. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 82 Rewards. Just as he was about to speak, the professor, who had paused, slightly raised his gaze, his gentle eyes sweeping across Anson's face before finally settling on the center of those deep brown pupils. Anson blinked, his face showing a mixture of nervousness and anticipation, like a student waiting to be instructed by his teacher. Of course, not now. In the last second of his pause, Mace Harnard smiled. My dear friend Anson Bach, your most important task now is to resolve your own allowance issue and settle down in Clovis as soon as possible. Have you found a place to live? Yes, I've rented an apartment on Bullen Street in White Lake Park. Anson nodded slightly, looking at the professor with respect. That sounds like the kind of choice you kids would make, Mace Harnard said casually. Before I came, I heard there were some minor incidents on Boulevard, seemingly related to some old gods cultists. No, it was just a cafe that refused to pay its security company's fees and unfortunately had a gas leak. By the time I got there, it was all over. Anson deliberately told a small lie. That's good, but remember to be careful. Mace Harnard's expression remained calm, and he didn't press further. It seems he really can't control his whereabouts at all times, so today's meeting was just a coincidence. Of course, it's also possible that the other party deliberately wanted him to believe that. Until he figured out the tricks of the dark magic, he had to be vigilant. Anson chuckled and replied, I will try my best to be careful, Professor, to not find an old man's boring lectures so pleasing. It seems the battlefield has really influenced you deeply, Mace Harnard said jokingly. But what pleases me even more is that the battlefield hasn't diminished your love for a historical truth. You mean? Anson's eyes lit up. August. The professor nodded slightly. At first, like you, I thought it was just a rare but common traditional Clovis surname, but as I mentioned in my letter, it's not ordinary. This surname isn't found in the main historical records of the Clovis kingdom, but it occasionally appears in many published private diaries, mostly as a recollection, described as ancient, traditional, and closed. In fact, most of the diary owners seem to have only a vague understanding of this family's existence. This situation has certainly piqued my curiosity, prompting me to continue my investigation. Mace Horner sighed, his gaze turning to Anson with interest. Dear Anson Bach, do you know the Rune family? I've only heard of them, but not much, Anson answered truthfully. Their family history dates back to the founding of the Clovis Kingdom, yet they are very low-key. Aside from the occasional investment in large public facilities or commercial projects, there's almost no mention of any political achievements by this family. Such behavior was highly unusual for the Clovis nobility. In the Clovis Kingdom, where only nobles could participate in politics, a family's ability to secure a seat in the Privy Council or local council was sometimes more important than the title itself. Losing political influence often marked the beginning of a family's decline. No matter how much wealth and land they accumulated, it would quickly vanish within 1 or 2 generations. If former Anson hadn't been a history and conspiracy theorist enthusiast, Anson would have been almost completely unaware of their existence. In almost every record that can be found, the name August is mentioned, and it is always associated with a Rune family. Sometimes, the two surnames even appear side by side, Mace Horner said, nodding slightly and tapping the records of the Cloa Kingdom's crests in his hand. At first, I just thought it was a coincidence, but when these coincidences occur again and again, without any official records, it proves that there must be something wrong. A family that is so ancient and once prosperous could not have left no trace. In addition, some diaries have vaguely mentioned that the August family may have been followers of the old gods. If this is true, then as long as we find the reason for their decline, we may be able to restore some of the hidden historical truths. Slightly excited, Mace Horner breathed a sigh of relief and smiled at Anson, saying, in short, the history of the August family is indeed a very interesting topic, and I will continue to search for it. I will try to tell you about any new discoveries through letters. I also suggest you take advantage of this time to visit St. Isaac's Academy and a few monasteries in the capital. The path to knowledge isn't just in the library, but also in classrooms and cafes. Just as the two were still talking, hurried footsteps echoed from the end of the corridor. There'll be a good opportunity this Friday evening. Mace Horner handed Anson a copy of the records of the heraldry of the Kingdom of Clovis. I've organized a small history study group at the Academy, with students and some respectable people from outside the Academy. Most importantly, they're all history enthusiasts. If you're interested, feel free to come over. The address is tucked inside the cover. Anson nodded repeatedly, a hint of excitement in his eyes. He accepted the book with both hands, glancing out of the corner of his eye at the figure approaching from the end of the corridor. It was a man in a dark academic robe, with ice blue eyes, roughly his own age. Professor, the carriage is waiting for you outside. Footsteps stopped behind Mace Horner, and the young scholar spoke softly. A message from St. Isaac's Academy says there's an academic conference at 2:30 that requires your attendance. I understand. The professor nodded slightly, gave Anson a wink, and turned to leave. From beginning to end, the young scholar with ice blue eyes didn't glance at Anson once. Anson stood there the whole time, watching the two figures disappear until no more footsteps could be heard in the quiet corridor. So, he had completed his initial mission and officially begun his career in the underground evil organization, right? And this admission ticket was his reward? Examining the records of the Cloa Kingdom's crests in his hand, Anson, who hadn't uttered a word, slightly curled the corners of his mouth, and the scene of the conversation between the two just now began to surface in his mind. On December 25th, Mace Horner returned to the capital from Oakwood and was discovered by the Royal Guard. Today, the Royal Military Academy, overwhelmed with documents and resumes, invited a group of teachers from St. Isaac's Academy to help them organize the excess files. Mace Horner was the only professor who volunteered to come. So, if his encounter with this history professor was just an accident, what was his real purpose in bringing him here? Who knows? Perhaps he could find more traces the professor had concealed. Filled with curiosity, Anson, clutching his book, headed in the opposite direction from the exit. Chapter 83 The Non-Existent Officer. On the congested Friedrichstrasse, an unassuming old-fashioned four-wheeled carriage moved slowly. Mace Horner leaned quietly against the seat, his copy of The Life of Isaac Rand spread out on his lap, gently turning the pages in the sunlight streaming through the window. The young scholar sitting opposite him took out a prepared bottle of wine and a glass from the carriage drawer, meticulously poured the wine, and carefully placed it on the table, slowly pushing it to a position where Mace Horner could easily reach it. "Professor, you've gone too far today," the professor said softly without looking up, his gaze falling on the passage describing St. Isaac's betrayal by his companions and his death in his home. Anson Bach is key to my next series of plans, and has great value. Even just his achievements at Thunderberg deserve your respect, even if unwillingly. I'm terribly sorry. The terrified young scholar lowered his head sharply, his upright body trembling slightly. I didn't mean anything by it. I just, jealousy. Mace Horner turned the pages of his book, speaking casually. Absolutely not. The young scholar stopped abruptly as if electrocuted, his wide eyes narrowing. It was just a matter of time, forcing me to interrupt your conversation with Lord Anson Bach. There was absolutely no other reason. Enough, Mace Horner interrupted softly, his brow slightly furrowed. He picked up the wine glass on the table, his gaze never leaving the book in his hands. Then tell me why you were being so rude. The young scholar let out a long sigh, his terrified expression quickly returning to its initial composure. His icy blue eyes calmly met the professor's gaze. We've been exposed, on the crowded street, an old-fashioned carriage, having just rounded an intersection, stopped under a gas lamp by the roadside. This is intelligence obtained from within the Royal Guard, along with details of yesterday's commotion at the Central West Station of the Royal Capital. The young scholar pulled a note from his sleeve and gently placed it under his wineglass. Lieutenant Colonel C. Wald, commander of the 2nd Battle Regiment of the Royal Guard, discovered your itinerary on December 3rd of last year and has been monitoring us ever since. Oh? It seems I should pay a visit to this competent Royal Guard commander. Gently closing his book, Mace Horner smiled. Where's he now? The cemetery, the young scholar said curtly. He's dead, killed in an absurd extortionate revenge killing on the Iron Sky? Slightly surprised, Mace Horner narrowed his eyes slightly. Our informant says the Royal Guard is currently conducting a full-scale manhunt for a novelist named Draco Veltz, who works for the Crovey Truth newspaper and has a very close connection to that absurd murder case. The young scholar, watching the passers-by outside the window, cautiously lowered his voice. Not only that, this man has also collected a large amount of classified intelligence and plans related to the Royal Guard. His whereabouts are currently unknown. We can only conclude that he has not yet left Clovey City. Most importantly, among the contents he possesses is intelligence about you and the entire organization. Mace Horner smiled, his raised glass pausing in midair. I must now return to St. Isaac's Academy. An academic conference awaits me, and you. The professor swirled the purplish-red liquid in his glass. Looking gently into those icy blue eyes, and you, immediately return to the Royal Military Academy to retrieve some things for me. If anyone asks, say I accidentally lost an important notebook in the archives. Yes, the young scholar rose from the carriage and hurried towards the academy. Watching the figure disappear into the crowd, Mace Horner's smile turned playful. 1st August, now the steel sky. Hell, looks like I'll have even more to talk about with my dear Anson Bach next time we meet. The professor downed his glass in one gulp, the crimson liquid flowing like blood down his lips and neck. Perhaps because he was too busy, Anson, posing as a student of St. Isaac's Academy, easily slipped into the Royal Military Academy's archives and found the documents Mace Horner had previously compiled, applications for the deployment and travel of low-rank Southern officers in Clovis City. Pretty much as he had initially guessed. Anson, buried in the pile of documents, quickly scanned the chaotic registration records. The Kingdom of Clovis had a nominally very strict management system for the travel and assignment of officers, even low-ranking ones, requiring registration each time to verify their identity and trace responsibility. Conversely, by controlling these rosters and registration records, one can create a non-existent officer in a non-existent location, especially low-ranking officers below the rank of captain. Infantry company commanders, reserve lieutenants, standard-bearers, buglers, quartermasters, these officers who truly control the kingdom's army but are rarely recorded in detail are Mace Horner's targets. The identity of a low-ranking officer may not seem significant, but it allows an imposter to easily open doors that are usually closed to outsiders. Wealthy merchants and local nobles, unwilling to cause trouble, rarely refuse a reasonable request from someone with a right to carry a gun. Mace Horner exploits this, repeatedly concealing his identity to move throughout the kingdom and carry out his plans. According to evidence gathered by a certain talkative novelist, he is implicated in several murders in the capital yet remains unscathed. Thanks to these identities, his presence at the Royal Military Academy today is likely to use this opportunity to wrap up an operation. Unbeknownst to him, his whereabouts had been exposed. If they could find a previously non-existent officer in the records, they could expose his long-standing charade. Then, when forced to confront the Black Mage and his underground evil organization, he would have a trump card to use in betrayal. Anson's pupils constricted, his gaze landing on the name of a quartermaster named John Ness. Just then. Huh? Anson jolted, the six-pointed star brand on his heart sending a similar, but more intense, searing pain through him. Mace Hornard, he's back. Or, is there a third spellcaster in this building? Quickly closing the list in his hand, Anson desperately tried to remain calm, instinctively turning his gaze towards the door of the archives. In the quiet archives, where only the sound of turning pages and breathing could be heard, the slightly hurried footsteps outside the door grew faster and faster. The stabbing pain in his chest grew stronger. Slowly rising to his feet, Anson ducked behind a bookshelf, his right hand at his waist, poised to draw his gun. His gaze was fixed on the door of the archives room, as if he could already see the rapidly approaching figure. 3 steps, 2 steps, 1 step. Bang! The door was flung open, and a pair of eyes shot like arrows to the spot where Anson had just been sitting. A pair of icy blue eyes. Chapter 84 Goodwill. Excuse me, I am Professor Mace Hornard's student, the expressionless young scholar, hands behind his back, his icy blue eyes rudely interrupting the clerk who had approached to inquire. The professor was in a hurry before leaving and left behind an important set of notes. Oh, you're Professor Hornard's student, no problem. The clerk smiled obsequiously and politely pointed him in the right direction. The professor's previous seat was by the window. I'll take you, no need, I know where it is. Leaving those words and the clerk's changing expression, the young scholar, hands behind his back, walked straight toward his destination. Piles of files and documents were neatly stacked on the table, and chairs were pushed into the table as well. Without much thought, the young scholar pulled out a chair and sat down, quickly beginning to flip through the stacks of files. He soon found the document, Application for the Deployment and Travel of a Low-Ranking Southern Officer in Clovis City. The young scholar carefully retrieved the file, attaching a note he had prepared beforehand. He rose and walked out, once again ignoring the clerk who approached to ask questions, heading straight for the corridor outside. Watching the figure lingering at the end of the corridor, the young scholar, slightly frowning, hid the file behind his back and slowed his pace as he approached. Why are you still here, huh? As if suddenly startled, Anson, who was engrossed in reading the record of the Crowley Kingdom's crests, looked up blankly, nearly falling against a wall. You are, I'm Professor Mace Hornard's student. Before Anson could speak, the impatient young scholar quickly said, we just met, you can call me Braun. Ah, I remember now. Anson, suddenly realizing, snapped his book shut and extended his right hand to the young scholar with great enthusiasm. Hello, you can call me Anson Bach, I know your name. Braun hesitated for a moment, his brows slightly furrowed, before reluctantly shaking hands with Anson. You haven't answered my question yet. Question? Anson blinked. What question? Why haven't you left yet? That. Scratching his head, Anson smiled somewhat embarrassedly. No other reason, I just couldn't help getting a little engrossed in this book. Excuse me. Is there anything I can help you with? Looking into those sincere, clear eyes, Braun's lips twitched slightly, his hands behind his back. Nothing, just a bit curious, Braun said stiffly. Then I'll take my leave. The professor is waiting for me. Please remember to give my regards to the professor. Anson nodded, addressing him very solemnly. With that, Braun turned and headed towards the exit of the building without any formalities. Just when Anson thought he was about to leave, the young scholar, who had his hands behind his back, suddenly stopped. He hesitated for a few seconds before slowly turning back, his cool, icy blue eyes appearing unusually profound in the silent corridor. Secret, Anson raised an eyebrow, looking at him with some confusion. Lord Anson Bach, it seems you haven't yet mastered the art of stealth. Braun stepped forward and continued. This means any spellcaster can easily detect your presence with just a little effort, a significant disadvantage for a novice spellcaster like yourself. Of course, I'm not saying they will necessarily pose a threat. But the existence of us old gods followers is inherently unacceptable to the secular world. For whatever reason, easily exposing ourselves is never a good idea. Why has this guy suddenly changed his tune? Even the way he addresses me has changed? 1,000 questions suddenly popped into Anson's mind. With a look of sudden realization, he asked, I see, Mr. Braun. So, what should I do? Very simple, Braun said expressionlessly. It's more like an instinct, like opening your eyes and breathing. No one holds their breath or closes their eyes under normal circumstances. Just like us spellcasters who have mastered magic, being ready to cast spells at any time is the most natural thing for us. But conversely, holding your breath and closing your eyes isn't a complicated skill that requires practice. Of course, a certain degree of adaptation and repeated practice is still necessary. Bron walked up to Anson and took a folded letter from his academic robes, handing it to him. These are notes I made while studying. They might be helpful to you. My suggestion is to develop some small habits or hobbies. You could try wearing non-prescription glasses or smoking a pipe. That would help you master these skills faster. Thank you very much. Anson gratefully accepted the notes from Bron. Watching Anson put away his notebook, Bron gave him a stiff, slight nod, then turned and hurried down the corridor, his light footsteps echoing in the quiet space. Only after confirming that the others' footsteps had left the building did Anson, who had been on edge the entire time, finally breathe a sigh of relief. That was close. Just a hair's breadth away. If Bron had asked that clerk one more question, he would have been exposed. Unplanned, impromptu decisions are indeed unreliable. But now the worst was over, and this trip had been quite fruitful. Not only had he solved the issue of his allowance and obtained his entry ticket to the Old Gods organization, but he had also acquired a trump card that might come in handy sometime. Anson carefully opened the book in his hands. A draft paper and a carbon paper clip were tucked between the pages. Always carrying paper and pen, that's the advantage of having a habit of keeping a diary. With a smug smirk, Anson tucked his book and diary into his coat pocket and left the Royal Military Academy, hailing a carriage on the street. Before leaving Fredericksburg Street, remembering an old woman's instruction, he made a detour to a cafe. Your fine tobacco? 2 pounds, 10 silver coins in total. The cafe waiter enthusiastically packed his bundle, adding, please remember to give our regards to Mrs. Bogner. She hasn't been here in a long time. 2 pounds of tobacco for 10 silver coins? Slightly taken aback, Anson nodded and handed over 2 gold coins. The waiter's eyes lit up, and he even more enthusiastically gave Anson his change, placing 10 copper coins neatly in front of him, his eager gaze seeming to anticipate something. Seeing the waiter's suggestive look, Anson smiled knowingly, then he stuffed all the change into his pocket and turned to leave without looking back. Anson, in high spirits, hurried back to Boulevard, paid the coachman the 10 copper coins he'd received from the cafe, jumped off the carriage, and headed towards the apartment. Just as he reached the door, he suddenly stopped, his smile fading as he frowned slightly. 4 fully armed guards stood outside the apartment door. Chapter 85 Routine Inquiry. 10 minutes later, 2 guards officers entered the living room and sat down facing Anson, who had to squeeze onto a small sofa. Because the only long sofa in the living room was occupied by the 2 guards, the petite Lisa had to squeeze in with Anson, staring intently at the 2 officers like a wary ragdoll cat. Mrs. Borner, as usual, was wrapped in her thin blanket and sunken into the sofa, perhaps because of the briar pipe in her mouth. Her cloudy eyes, looking at Anson, were softer than before. The living room, so quiet that only the crackling of the fireplace could be heard, had an exceptionally oppressive atmosphere. Ahem, the guard officer on the left of the sofa, with light gray eyes and a hooked nose, coughed lightly, pulled a notebook and pencil from his coat pocket, and looked at Anson with wary eyes. Name. Before Anson could answer, the guard officer on the right suddenly slapped his colleague's shoulder, smiling gently at Anson. Dear Mrs. Borner. Oh, and this friend from the army. I'm sorry, my colleague is being a bit too serious. We received a report that the bombing at the cafe on Boulevard Ballman is suspected to be related to Old Gods activities. Ignoring his companion's surprised look, the apologetic guard officer continued to laugh at the 3. So this is just a routine inquiry, a quick check, so everyone relax, don't be so tense. We're the guards, not some gangster extorting money, haha. The simple joke eased the previously tense atmosphere considerably. My name is Anson Bach, and this is my sister, Lisa Bach. Patting Lisa's head, Anson smiled and repeated what he had told the talkative novelist earlier. We arrived in the capital yesterday, and we were sitting in this living room when the cafe exploded. Madame Borner can attest to that. I was discussing the rent with her at the time. The smiling guard officer turned to the old woman beside him. Madame Borner, who never had a pleasant expression, puffed out a cloud of smoke and gave a cold snort as if in agreement. Well, since Mrs. Borner testified, then there's definitely no problem. The guard officer shrugged with a smile and continued casually, since you only arrived yesterday, That means you have absolutely no recollection of old John's cafe downstairs, and don't know the cause of its sudden explosion, right? Yes, and you didn't find any suspicious people or anything unusual. No, in that case, we have nothing more to ask. The guard officer stood up and extended his right hand warmly to Anson. Thank you for your cooperation, Your Excellency Anson Bach. Next time, if you find anything suspicious or amiss, please immediately report to the nearest guard, and we will come to handle it as soon as possible. Yes, next time. Next time. Anson stood up, shook hands with the officers with a polite smile, and prepared to see the two guard officers out. Just then. Wait a minute, the hook-nosed officer, who had been sitting on the sofa and silent ever since being interrupted the first time he spoke, suddenly spoke up. Lord Anson Bach, you just said, you arrived in the capital yesterday. The pleasant atmosphere instantly turned oppressive again. The smiling guard officer looked at Anson with a slightly apologetic gaze, and silently sat back down on the sofa. Anson picked up Lisa from the sofa and slowly sat down. Yes, and what mode of transportation did you use to arrive in the capital? With a flat tone. The hook-nosed officer raised his eyes and sized up Anson. West Central Station of the capital, the Steel Sky, carriage 10, second class compartment number 3, is that right? This guy is up to no good. Anson's heart tightened, but he shrugged casually. Yes, you're right, just answer yes or no, Mr. Anson Bach. The hook-nosed officer's tone was sinister. Continue answering my questions. Besides Miss Lisa Bach, there was another person in your carriage, right? Yes, Anson answered truthfully without changing his expression. Wearing an old overcoat, red hair, Draco Veltz, is that right? Yes. Could you tell me in detail about your interactions with him along the way? Sorry, but this question can't really be answered with yes and no. Anson, staring into the other's eyes, shrugged in feigned regret. The hook-nosed officer was taken aback at first, then his gloomy expression instantly turned furious. You, slap, just as he lunged at Anson, the guard officer sitting beside him grabbed his shoulder again. The hook-nosed officer, his face pale, turned his head, only to see his companion shaking his head slightly. Don't get so agitated, sit down and talk things over. The guard officer smiled again at Anson and the fierce-looking Lisa, then looked at his companion beside him. Are you trying to anger Mrs. Borner by treating the guests here so rudely? The hook-nosed officer, his face flushed with anger, looked at his companion's eyes, paused, and then silently sat back down on the sofa. Mrs. Borner, curled up on the sofa, remained silent and exhaled a long puff of smoke toward the two officers. Ahem, the hook-nosed officer coughed twice, took a deep breath, and looked at Anson again with his light gray eyes. Your Excellency Anson Bach, please tell us in detail what happened between you and Draco Veltz. It involves a bizarre murder, so please be as detailed as possible. Yes, sir. Anson, looking somewhat surprised, glanced at the two guards officers with different expressions and Mrs. Borner smoking her pipe, and said quite frankly, to be honest, I don't know much about this man. I was having lunch with Elisa when the murder happened, and apart from knowing that someone in the first-class compartment had been killed, I know nothing else. As for the experience, this novelist named Draco Veltz is a chatterbox. Very talkative, and also very good at annoying people. However, what he said was basically boring nonsense, which he forgot as soon as he said it, so it didn't leave much of an impression. This explanation was prepared by Anson before leaving the Iron Sky, and the content was basically true, without any very obvious loopholes. Basically, he just removed the events of the day of the murder. Just as Anson thought he was finally about to get up and leave, a cold voice suddenly rang out in the living room. The trunk. The hook-nosed officer stared coldly at Anson, his lips barely moving as he uttered the word. What? Anson, alert, blinked, feigning ignorance as he looked at him. What trunk? Observing Anson's expression, the hook-nosed officer narrowed his eyes and turned to look at the elderly woman who had remained silent to the side. Your Excellency Mrs. Borner, may I ask if you have noticed a trunk that seems a bit off among the luggage brought by His Excellency Anson Bach, a leather briefcase, somewhat worn. Chapter 86 Heroic Sacrifice. The moment she was asked the question, Mrs. Borner, who had remained silent until then, frowned for the first time. The hook-nosed officer, his eyes fixed on the old woman's expression, breathed slightly rapid, and his right hand, holding the pencil, began to tremble slightly. His usually amiable companion also lost his smile, his casual gaze shifting intentionally or unintentionally between Mrs. Borner and Anson. Anson, his heart pounding, remained completely bewildered, his right hand, which had been resting naturally at his side, slowly moving towards his lower back under his coat. In the ensuing silence, even Lisa felt the increasingly oppressive atmosphere. Her petite body, half reclining in Anson's arms, curled slightly, like a young animal poised to pounce on its prey. Snap! Mrs. Borner removed her pipe from her mouth, exhaled a long puff of smoke, and turned her cloudy eyes, her gaze shifting from Anson to the hook-nosed officer. "That briefcase you mentioned. I haven't seen it." The hook-nosed officer, his expression instantly one of astonishment, shuddered violently, nearly falling off the sofa. Not only him, but even Anson felt a surge of surprise, struggling to suppress the urge to look at the old woman. The two guards exchanged a glance. The serious-looking hook-nosed officer clearly wanted to press for more information, but silently put away his notebook and pencil. Since even Lady Bonner says so, it seems we were overthinking it." The amiable guard glanced out the window at the darkening sky and smiled apologetically at the three. "Sorry, we seem to have delayed your dinner, but please understand, we are the Royal Guard. Protecting the loyal citizens of the kingdom and apprehending criminals are all our duties, so if you discover anything suspicious or amiss, please immediately report to the nearest guard, and we will come to handle it as soon as possible." Repeating his previous words, the smiling guard officer extended his right hand to Anson again. "Lord Anson Bach, thank you again for your cooperation. Farewell." This time it's for real. "You're welcome. It's all my duty." Anson stood up and shook hands with the officer again. After saying that, the two guard officers left the room one after the other, and walked towards another house on the street with the other two guards outside the door. Bang! Anson casually closed the door, his back to the living room, his expression gradually becoming serious. Something's not right. Something's very wrong. Anson had been mentally prepared for the other party to come and investigate since he left the Iron Sky. If he were in their shoes, he wouldn't have let go of such an important clue either. But the problem is, they were already certain that he and Draco Veltz were in the same compartment, even to the point of suspecting that the briefcase was in his possession, yet they dismissed his suspicions without even searching him, all because of Mrs. Bonner's words? Was it negligence, or were they trying to lower his guard? The former didn't seem likely, but if it was the latter, such a high-profile investigation, even questioning him about the briefcase in front of him, weren't they afraid he would run away, or try to destroy or convert the evidence in the briefcase into cash as soon as possible? Or was this their purpose, to make him expose himself so they could arrest him legitimately? Countless thoughts and guesses flashed through Anson's mind, only to be rejected one by one. Just as he was still hesitating, a sarcastic voice rang out in the living room. "Hey, how long are you going to stand there like an idiot?" Nothing." Startled, Anson turned to look at Mrs. Borner, who was curled up on the sofa wrapped in a thin blanket. "Thank you, Mrs. Borner. Thank you so much." Anson's expression was very solemn. If she hadn't been there, those two guards officers probably wouldn't have left so easily. Although he didn't understand why the guards would be so wary of an ordinary landlady. "Yes, you should thank me properly," Mrs. Bogner snorted, her cloudy eyes revealing disdain. "I hate the guards, but I hate being bothered even more, so whatever trouble you've gotten yourself into, you'd better get it all sorted out quickly, or I can't guarantee I'll still rent the house to you. Also, consider the tobacco you brought today as a thank you for solving this problem. I won't give you any extra money." "Of course, no problem," Anson replied without hesitation. "No problem." The old woman rolled her cloudy eyes at him. Realizing he'd misspoke, Anson quickly corrected himself. I meant, it's only right, tch, Mrs. Borner, pipe in hand, scoffed, her thin body wrapped in a blanket as she climbed out of the deep sofa. All right, stop standing there. I need to hurry and prepare dinner. Anson glanced out the window. It was completely dark. He reached out to stop Mrs. Borner from heading to the kitchen. "Maybe we should just forget it. It's really late. We can just grab something to eat and then," gurgle, a strange yet familiar sound echoed in the living room. Suddenly falling silent, Anson and Mrs. Borner simultaneously turned to look behind them. Lisa, sitting motionless on the sofa, stared at the two men with wide, earnest eyes, a mixture of grievance and seriousness in her expression. "I'm hungry." As she spoke, little Lisa raised her right hand and slapped her stomach hard. Thump, a flash of white light, and the hook-nosed officer, before he could even scream, collapsed to the ground like a rag doll, blood and froth mixed with broken teeth gushing from his twisted mouth. Before he could stand up, the guard officer grabbed him by the collar and dragged him up from the ground, smiling as he looked into the hook-nosed man's eyes. "I warned you not to make any rash moves, right?" The gentle, approachable voice, however, sent chills down his spine like a devil's whisper. The still shaken hook-nosed man breathed heavily, but his light gray eyes showed no fear. "No answer? Very well, then let me guess." The guard officer chuckled, winking at his partner. "You think Major Fabian is too foolish, too cowardly, unlike you, the esteemed Major David, who is young and decisive, so you keep trying to sabotage my plans, right?" The hook-nosed man pursed his lips, remaining silent, his cheek, where he had been slapped, quickly swelling. Seeing his silent companion, the guard officer's smile widened. "David, my dear David, hey, let me tell you a secret," the guard officer chuckled. "Do you know why I've been a major in the guards for almost 15 years, while you've climbed to the same position as me in just 4 or 5 years? Because you're smart? Brave? Loyal? No, no, no. No, let me explain it this way. The only time those big shots will make an exception and promote a nobody is when someone needs to step up and take responsibility." The guard officer's eyes were full of mockery. "So this slap was just my personal kind reminder, because I really don't want to be associated with this damn novelist because of you. I'm from the army, and I've also served in the Navy. I joined the guards just to stay in the capital. I really didn't intend to die for this job, you understand? If you understand, then we can still work together," Lieutenant Colonel Fabian said cheerfully. "If you don't understand, someone like you probably wouldn't care about heroic sacrifice, right?" Chapter 87 Ex-Husbands. In the cramped attic, Anson sat by the drafty window, clutching a copy of the Chloe Truth. The candlestick on the table flickered in the cold wind, its reflection shimmering on the newspaper, a shadow enough to drive any reader mad. But Anson's attention wasn't on the paper, his eyes were closed, and his mind raced with images of the apartment and its surroundings. Boulevard Ballman, devoid of its daytime bustle, was deserted except for the occasional passing carriage, ragged scavengers, and children still loudly hawking leftover fruit. On the chilly street, 3 tattered men, by the dim light of a gas lamp, warmed themselves outside the ruins of Old John's Cafe using scavenged trash and wood. Wearing old hats salvaged from trash cans, their faces mostly covered by their coat collars, they shivered in the cold wind around the faint flame, constantly breathing warm air into their hands, looking no different from the homeless people you'd see anywhere on the street. Well, if they didn't keep glancing towards the rooftop, they'd look even more like homeless people. Anson, his eyes tightly shut, reflected the faces of the 3 guards disguised as homeless people in his mind, a slight smugness playing on his lips. Just as he'd initially guessed, the guards wouldn't let go of this lead. Their so-called routine inquiry was just to raise his guard. If Anson Bach and Draco Veltz were truly in cahoots, they would definitely take action after being exposed. It wasn't entirely impossible that, in his panic, he might even seek help from some talkative novelist. They'd probably even hoped for that. Anson suspected that perhaps everyone on the Iron Sky who had ever been associated with Draco had been secretly controlled and monitored by the Royal Guard in a similar manner. 10 minutes later, the 2 vagrants, seemingly unable to bear the cold any longer, stood up, hugged their shoulders, and walked towards the other end of the street. Beside the campfire flickering in the cold wind, only one figure remained, still shivering. The low-brimmed hat and the gleaming light gray eyes never left the window. Was it him? Anson, slightly surprised, looked at the familiar hook-nosed man under the hat brim, half his face swollen. On the empty street, the howling wind grew stronger. The hook-nosed officer, wrapped in a tattered coat, clutched his collar tightly, pulled a crumpled cigarette from his pocket, and lit it with the help of the campfire whipped up by the cold wind. Wisps of smoke danced in the wind, seeping from the bleeding corner of his mouth into his chest, seemingly easing the pain in his hooked nose and warming his shivering body in the cold wind. What a stubborn fellow. Looking at the other's resolute expression, Anson couldn't help but sigh, a touch of emotion stirring within him. Although they seemed to be on opposing sides because of the same talkative novelist, what grudge did they actually hold against each other? They were both simply trying their best to survive in this cold and realistic world. In that respect, they were the same. Thinking this, Anson silently sighed, rising from his chair and picking up a mannequin he had prepared beforehand, securing the newspaper to its hand. Since this guy is so persistent, let him continue down his chosen path. The extra long candle he'd specially acquired should last all night. Almost moved by his own actions, Anson nodded in satisfaction, humming a little tune as he turned and left the attic. Although it was late, The skilled Mrs. Borner quickly prepared a feast: roasted sausages with sauce, apple pie, creamy fish pie, spicy soup, and a whole roasted chicken. Except for the lack of alcoholic beverages, the lavish spread rivaled a banquet. Watching Mrs. Borner magically produce plate after plate of steaming food from the empty kitchen, Anson felt for the first time that renting this apartment, which was significantly more expensive than the surrounding ones, was truly worthwhile. Of course, the price was that he had to pay for all the ingredients, a bit painful for Anson, whose allowance was still unresolved and who relied on the 1,000 gold coins Ludwig gave him to make ends meet. However, compared to the countryside back in Thunderberg or even Oaktown, Clovis, the capital city, not only had an abundance of ingredients but also much lower prices. As long as one owned a shop or ran an industry with a stable income, an ordinary family of 5 could enjoy a sumptuous dinner of 4 dishes and hot soup. At the same time, some things were outrageously expensive. A small piece of cake cost 2.5 silver coins, and a pound of fine tobacco could sell for 5 silver coins. Even Mrs. Borner, the landlady who held several profitable stocks, would only go to the restaurant 4 times every 6 months and have 2 new dresses made at the tailor shop. After enjoying a sumptuous dinner, the 3 satisfied people sat around the table, enjoying the last moments of peace before going to bed. Just then, Lisa, who had been focused on finishing her food, suddenly asked Anson a question he had wanted to ask but hadn't dared to ask. Mrs. Borner, why were those 2 men so afraid of you? Mrs. Borner, relaxed, leaned back lazily in her chair, a slight smug smile playing on her lips as she smoked her pipe. It's mainly because of my ex-husband. Anson nodded. This was basically his guess. Although Mrs. Borner had divorced her husband, the fact that Viscount Borner would still specifically introduce tenants to her suggested that their relationship still existed. Anson had done some research before leaving home during the day. This Viscount Borner not only held positions in the Privy Council and the Railway Commission, but was also a shareholder in a logistics company in Clovis and owned a fairly influential newspaper. Such a wealthy and influential old nobleman, even the royal guard probably wouldn't dare. And my ex-husband's, huh? Anson nearly fell off his chair, caught off guard. Lisa, not understanding the difference between the 2 sentences, tilted her head and blinked. Mrs. Borner, pipe in hand, lifted a wrinkled face and gently patted the curious little head. Oh, how many ex-husbands? Hey, my dear little Lisa, that's an interesting question, but those were all many years ago. Decades have passed, and even memories have faded, except for that bastard who still clings to me but dares not visit because of his status. He deserves to go to hell. I've forgotten what the others look like. All that remains are the memories of those grand balls, those sweet dinners, those strolls in the fountain garden. Oh, and houses, Anson blurted out, unable to contain himself. Every time I get married, I have my husband buy me an apartment on Boulevard. Boulevard is a testament to our eternal love. Mrs. Borner, puffing on her cigarette, spoke softly. Like the midnight breeze of a harbor, before I knew it, this old lady had become the biggest landlord on this street. So remember my lesson, dear little Lisa, real estate can't buy true love. Anson. Chapter 88 St. Isaac Academy. Early in the morning, the weather in Clovis was still gloomy and foggy. After enjoying a breakfast of hot water and dry bread, Anson leisurely went up to the attic, picked up a long burnt candle, and looked out the drafty window at a figure outside. Outside, in the biting wind, a ragged, hook-nosed officer sat cross-legged on the muddy street, leaning against a thin gas lamp post. His face, though showing signs of exhaustion, was marred by bloodshot eyes that remained fixed on the attic window. Judging from his complexion, he had probably been out all night, in this freezing winter. What a determined fellow. Anson shook his head with a touch of admiration, then left the attic with a strange sense of pleasure, changed into his coat, and prepared to go out. Professor Mace Harnard's History Society meeting was scheduled for 6:30 p.m., but Anson planned to leave early. Partly to avoid any unforeseen circumstances, and partly to have more opportunities to interact and get to know the other members. As a newcomer, this was a kind of self-awareness. To rise in an organization or betray it, remaining an insignificant outsider was a dead end. After leaving a note and some change for Lisa at the dinner table, Anson left with peace of mind and called out to a passing carriage. Where to? Saint, up. Anson was about to speak when he noticed the gaze of a certain vagrant nearby. He paused, then flashed a bright smile. I've only been in the capital for a short time. Show me around. No problem, the coachman replied enthusiastically. Tourists visiting the capital for the first time were the easiest to fool. The carriage sped through street after street, Anson watching the scenery rush past the window, and a ragged vagrant following closely behind. He first disembarked on Red Brick Street and instructed the coachman to wait outside the church. Only when the vagrant was about to lose patience did he leisurely leave the prayer room, board the carriage, and head towards White Lake Park. 30 minutes later, the carriage stopped at the crossroads. Anson alighted and bought a copy of today's Chloe Truth from a passing newsboy, tucked the folded newspaper under his arm, and stepped out. When he noticed Anson was still walking into the park, the hook-nosed officer, who had been following him closely, finally hesitated and stopped. His tattered clothes were too conspicuous in the sparsely populated park, and continuing to follow him would likely expose him. Just when Anson thought the guy had finally given up, he strolled to the lakeside square and saw the ragged figure hiding in the bushes again, perched on a tree at the edge of the square, spying on him. This guy was truly persistent. A slightly exasperated Anson twitched his lips, a hint of doubt creeping in. Draco had mentioned that the Royal Guard only knew the evidence and clues had been taken away, not where they were hidden. How did he know it was a worn-out leather briefcase? A guess? Filled with questions, Anson sat on a bench in the square, his back to the gaze of someone in the woods, feeding the pigeons with leftover breadcrumbs from his breakfast. These white creatures fluttering in the air were one of the few natural sights in the gloomy city of Clovis. Time passed slowly, and a few rays of sunlight gradually pierced the overcast sky, bringing with them more pedestrians and tourists to the once empty park. Patient Anson remained seated on the bench, leisurely enjoying the morning mist and the chirping of dozens, if not hundreds, of birds, until he spotted his target, a middle-aged man of similar height and wearing a similar dark coat, approaching the bench. Using the crowd behind him as cover, Anson rose the instant the man passed, casually tucking a neatly folded newspaper under his arm, then quickly walked away in the opposite direction without looking back. Once the crowd dispersed, the bench was empty. 20 minutes later, confirming that no one was following him, Anson left White Lake Park, flagged down a carriage, different in appearance from the previous ones, and headed towards St. Isaac's College. On June 11th, under the guidance of the esteemed Professor Mace Hornard, I and 13 other students from the Central Province arrived at our destination, St. Isaac's Academy, in a government-sponsored carriage. This ancient academy is magnificent, grand, and elegant, with towering buildings reaching into the clouds, but all these spectacular structures pale in comparison to its historical significance. 40 years before the Holy Calendar, St. Isaac Rand, who, like me, was born in the countryside of this central province, discovered the secrets of steam here, ushering in this new era. What a magnificent achievement, what a brilliant life. And I, fortunate enough to be here, will surely walk a path no less remarkable than his. Bang, gently closing his diary, Anson, who was visiting this academy for the first time, stood outside the school gate, slowly raising his gaze to the full-body statue standing before him. It was a slightly elongated statue. On a marble pedestal stood a young man in a priest's robe, his hair somewhat disheveled. In his left hand he held a copy of the Order Church's doctrine, the original text, while his right hand held aloft a model of a steam collar, posing as if striding forward. A plaque on the pedestal bore the inscription, "Faith and exploration lead the world, how to describe it?" Anson gazed at the lifelike statue before him, a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. It was clearly a work of art brimming with symbolic meaning, yet it exuded an air of arrogance and haughtiness from beginning to end, sculpting a great man of an era into something resembling a narcissist. Perhaps it was because, while the Order Church verbally acknowledged St. Isaac's status, they had never truly liked this man who had nearly overthrown the entire church. Anson shook his head and walked along the ancient stone path towards the castle-like academy. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, the midday sun pierced through the clouds, letting golden light stream through the windows into the dimly lit corridor, even making the dust particles floating in the air seem more sacred. Enter through the main entrance on the left, pass through the long corridor, follow the stone stairs, to the third floor, the red carpet hall. Looking at the note the professor had left him, Anson stood frozen before the spiral stone stairs. So, is it 3 floors above ground or 3 floors below? Generally, it's definitely 3 floors above ground, but this is a secret gathering of an underground evil organization. An underground evil organization, underground, so 3 floors below ground is also possible, right? Just as Anson was caught in a dilemma, preparing to try going upstairs first, a cold voice suddenly rang out behind him. You're too late. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 89 Divination. In that instant, Anson, completely unaware, felt a chill run down his spine. Someone was standing behind him, and he hadn't even noticed. How could this be? Suppressing his inner terror, Anson slowly turned around, a slightly unnatural expression on his face. A man in a black robe was standing behind him. His arms were crossed in front of him, a wide hood obscuring most of his face. Only his thin lips and leaden curly hair were vaguely visible, exuding a serious and mysterious aura from head to toe. Excuse me, you're late, the man said coldly again. Why are you only arriving now? Only now? The note Mace Horner had left for him said the party was at 6:30 p.m., it was still afternoon. No one had informed him of the time change. Just as Anson was about to ask, the man in the black robe and hood suddenly snorted impatiently. Fine, it seems some entity is interfering with their actions, making you a step too late. Follow me, the bells of fate await you. The man in the black robe walked to the steps and coldly said to Anson behind him, our time is running out. With that, he stepped down, leaving the bewildered Anson behind. The bells of fate. What the hell? After hesitating for a few seconds, Anson still chose to follow behind the man in the black robe, descending the spiral stone steps. Clap, clap, clap. The crisp sound of footsteps echoed in the deep, well-like spiral staircase. The further down he went, the darker it became. The darkness, seemingly seeping from the earth, was like light that could devour everything, hiding everything in shadow. Anson, increasingly tense as he followed the man in the black robe, even began to count the steps to determine his position, his nerves on edge, never daring to relax for a moment. Just as he counted to 66, the stone steps beneath his feet transformed into solid concrete slabs. We're here, the deep-voiced man in black robes, his back to Anson, pulled a bunch of old iron keys from beneath his robes. With a grating creak, he opened a dilapidated wooden door amidst a cloud of dust. Go in, he's waiting for you. Anson nervously swallowed, his right hand unconsciously touching the gun handle at his waist, and stepped inside. The room was pitch black and empty. Huh? Standing in the center of the room, Anson suddenly sensed something and whirled around. The man in black robes was already standing before him. Who exactly are you? Anson's expression grew serious as he narrowed his eyes, realizing he might have fallen into someone's trap. His right hand gripped the gun handle at his waist. And where is this? No, you've asked the wrong question. The man in black shook his head. My existence is insignificant, I'm merely an announcer in a great drama. The truly important and correct questions are who are you, and where are you? Anson cautiously took a step forward, making sure he could escape the room before the other man locked the door. All right. Then please tell me who am I, and where am I? He decided to play along for a while, trying to elicit the reason for the man's silent appearance behind him. Snap! The man in black stepped forward without warning, and Anson, startled, shuddered. You are a very special being, an important character in this great drama, the black-robed man spoke in a deep voice, almost bringing his face close to Anson's. You are a discordant note, an unexpected presence, a turning point in the drama. The beginning of the plot's climax that the audience has been waiting for. Your appearance here signifies that the curtain of the drama has officially risen at this moment. Everything else was merely a prelude to this moment. Anson, his heart pounding, paid no attention to the man's words. His right hand, gripping the gun handle, had already pulled a bullet from his pocket. The black-robed man before him seemed to possess some kind of technique for concealing his presence. Judging from his panting and footsteps, he seemed to be of a relatively weak type. But it couldn't be ruled out that it was due to special bloodline power. At this distance, if he used gathering flame, the man probably wouldn't have time to dodge, but he would most likely also be affected. You don't belong to this world, what? Anson stared intently at the gaze emanating from under the man's hood, so shocked that he almost drew his gun. He actually discovered it. The black-robed man's voice was utterly cold. But you need not be surprised. For all of this is the arrangement of God, revealed to the world through the mouths of mortals. He commanded me, as an announcer and diviner, to convey to you everything that must happen. God? Anson blurted out in shock. He needs no name, no form, he is the ruler of all things, The black-robed man nodded slowly. He governs all things, and everything in the world is under his control. When he wants to appear, he must rise from the sea, with hundreds of heads and thousands of horns, billions of tentacles, demonstrating his power, and you are the one chosen by God to carry out his great will. What will? Anson asked with difficulty, desperately trying to suppress his shock. Chosen one, open your eyes. The will of God is always self-evident, the man in black robes sneered. You are troubled, hesitant, and confused, but more importantly, you have severely underestimated the impending cataclysmic wave. If you do not act quickly, everyone will drown in the sea. Act! Act! He is watching you, waiting for you, otherwise, the world will be destroyed. The man in black robes' voice grew increasingly impassioned, trembling uncontrollably as if possessed. Just then, a blinding light suddenly shone into the pitch-black room, causing Anson to instinctively close his eyes. Anson Bach, what are you doing here? The familiar tone and question instantly snapped the stunned Anson back to his senses. As his eyes gradually adjusted to the light, he slowly opened them and saw a young man in an academic gown, carrying a kerosene lamp, standing outside the door. Most importantly, he had ice blue eyes. Braun? HMPH, the black-robed man turned his head to look behind him, coldly snorting at the young scholar. Is this another one who interferes with my destiny, trying to meddle in my actions? No, esteemed Professor Horst. Braun shook his head, looking at the two people in the room with some curiosity. I didn't mean to disturb you, but the dean just told me that you stole the key again and ran out without permission, causing quite a commotion. That traitor, the black-robed man, referred to as Professor Horst, growled angrily. I told him about his destiny, and he treats me like this. You told him he should resign and then take his wife to develop the colonies, Braun said expressionlessly. That was his destiny. He doesn't understand what God has arranged for him. Of course he understands. I mean, he's 82 years old this year. Braun's lips twitched, and then, the dean's wife passed away 10 years ago. As soon as he finished speaking, the pitch-black room suddenly fell silent. Dead. The black-robed man's voice suddenly softened. When did this happen? 10 years ago? In the 91st year of the Saints' calendar. This year is the 100th year of the Saints' calendar. Are you sure it's not the 70th year of the Saints' calendar? I'm absolutely sure. The black-robed man suddenly fell silent, his one straight back slowly hunching over. Braun, carrying a kerosene lamp, shook his head, his icy blue eyes looking at Anson. Come with me, the gathering is about to begin. Chapter 90: A Special Existence. As they ascended the silent, dark spiral staircase, Braun, holding a kerosene lamp, led the way in silence, while Anson followed behind, his face stiff and speechless. Professor Horst is a friend of Professor Mace Hornard. Just when Anson thought the silence would continue, Braun suddenly spoke. They both studied at St. Isaac's College in the same year, then worked there, becoming lecturers, associate professors, and professors around the same time, classmates, colleagues, and close friends. Both are deeply interested in history, especially in the life and experiences of St. Isaac. The difference is that Professor Horst's interest is never limited to books, but rather he's more passionate about exploration and fieldwork, verifying the fragments in ancient texts. His deep, emotionless voice echoed in the quiet stairwell. Then, what was with his behavior just now, and what was this so-called God? Slightly nervous, Anson couldn't help but ask. That happened 2 years ago, Braun said calmly. Professor Horst, who had been missing for a long time, suddenly returned to the academy, claiming that on a beach in the Ice-Fang Strait of the New World, he saw a colossal beast with hundreds of heads, thousands of horns, and billions of tentacles rise from the misty sea and convey a revelation to him in a way that transcended language, granting him the power of prophecy. From that day on, Professor Horst constantly promoted sensational things like the end of the world at various academic conferences and public occasions, wearing a black robe and semi-forcibly performing divination for everyone he met. Although most people just took it as the ramblings of an old professor, quite a few people believed it, resulting in a lot of trouble. In order to prevent Professor Horst from continuing to cause trouble for the academy, the dean had no choice but to arrange for him to stay under this relatively remote tower, using the abandoned laboratory as his divination room. Braun suddenly sighed. Because he's a close friend of Professor Mace Hornard, we, his students, are responsible for monitoring and looking after him, like sneaking out to bring passers-by back to his fortune-telling room. You're not the first, so don't take anything he says to you today to heart. Like the chosen one, the one who turns the clock, the villain who hinders God, He's probably prophesied things 100 times. Hearing Brown's slightly helpless tone, Anson couldn't help but twitch his lips. Since he's already, why not send him to hospital or let him recuperate at home? Street. Isaac's Academy is the highest level institution of learning in the Kingdom of Clovis, and also a high-level research institution of the Church of Order. Once a scandal involving a professor going insane occurs, it will be a serious blow to the reputation of the kingdom and the church, Braun explained. As for their homes, many professors live at the academy year-round, and very few form families, so unless their condition is so severe that they cannot communicate normally, they will not be easily forced to leave, unless they are unable to communicate normally. Anson asked incredulously, so? Professor Horst is not an exception? Oh, just as you thought, Braun nodded slightly. That's right, actually, most professors at St. Isaac's Academy have some problems. Some have more than one personality, some claim to be able to see another world. Some say that this world is just a novel. Professor Horst is a bit special, but not uncommon, so the highest level institution of learning in the Kingdom of Clovis and a high-level research institution of the Church of Order is actually a mental hospital? Anson simply didn't know what to say. Braun, who had placed the gas lamp in the corridor and put his hands behind his back, led Anson up the tower. All of the above is just an excuse prepared to deal with the academy and the outside world. Just when Anson thought the topic was finally over, Braun, who had his back to him, suddenly spoke again. What? Anson, who had just breathed a sigh of relief, stumbled. Professor Horst did go mad, but not because of that adventure. The cause of the matter is much earlier, Braun said softly as they walked. I don't know the specifics, but because I took care of Professor Horst for a long time, I occasionally heard him mention it. It seems to be because of a disagreement he had with Professor Mace Harnard about St. Isaac's research in St. Year 70, which is 30 years ago. He turned to look at Anson on his right, his icy blue eyes clear and deep. You were also a student of this academy, so I don't need to tell you much about the story of St. Isaac, do I? Anson nodded. During the Great Schism of the Church 40 years BC, Isaac Rand, born in the countryside of the Kingdom of Clovis, developed and improved the first-generation steam engine. In the following years, recognizing the power of this machine, the Kingdom of Clovis began to fully support him in his church factions. By 26 years BC, the rapidly growing power of Clovis had defeated its allies in several large-scale conflicts, and its territory continued to expand southward. In the first year of the saintly calendar, Isaac Rand was killed in an accidental bombing, along with many of his supporters, including priests and nobles. In the 47th year of the saintly calendar, the new pope canonized Isaac at the Second Order Council, recognizing his outstanding contributions and the injustice he suffered, and designated the year of his death as the first year of the saintly calendar. In short, as a great man who almost single-handedly ushered in an entire new era, Isaac Rand's historical status in the Kingdom of Clovis even surpasses, to some extent, that of the Austerian royal family and the Order Church. His successful canonization and even the resulting calendar change by the Church signified that the Kingdom of Clovis, once a barbaric kingdom built on war, had been formally accepted as an important member of the world of order, and established as a human kingdom independent of the empire's rule. All of this was familiar to Anson, who was born in Clovis and had studied at St. Isaac's Academy. Thinking of this, a new question arose in Anson's mind. Why would research on St. Isaac turn a history professor into this? The moment the words left his mouth, he caught a fleeting, amused smile on Braun's lips. To the Church of Order, Isaac Rand is a priest they despise, yet they cannot deny his status, Braun said in a low voice, his composure returning. To the Kingdom of Clovis, the world of order, and even the people of the New World, Isaac Rand is a name that represents steam and machinery, even change. To historians, his name is a symbol of an era, but to us, Braun stopped, glancing sideways at Anson. He is a very special being. A special being? Anson paused slightly, immediately realizing he was referring to the old gods. Isaac Rand. Braun paused, a mysterious glint in his icy blue eyes. He was the first spellcaster to simultaneously wield the power of the three old gods. Chapter 91. You're really something. No one knows exactly what they found, but on a certain night 30 years ago, Professor Hoster and Professor Mace Harner did indeed discover this secret. The St. Isaac, seen by the world as obsessed with machinery and who forged a glorious era, was actually a follower of the three old gods, and very likely the only spellcaster to simultaneously wield all three powers. After that day, Professor Mace Harnard began to follow in the footsteps of the old gods, becoming a dark mage, while Professor Hoster gradually lost his mind, becoming a mad diviner after returning from his final journey. Inside the cold, narrow spiral staircase, Braun's words seemed like whispers from another world, echoing in the stunned Anson's ears for a long time. After a long while, Anson, gradually recovering from his shock, fell silent for a moment, calmly looking into the pair of icy blue eyes staring at him. "Why are you telling me all this?" He had only met this student of the Dark Mage once, during a chance encounter at the military academy, and the atmosphere between them at the time was far from friendly. But in just a few tens of minutes, his attitude changed drastically during their second encounter. He was incredibly enthusiastic in teaching him secret techniques. This time, he not only helped him out of the embarrassment of being fooled by Professor Horst, but also told him about Professor Mace Harnard's unknown past, including the bombshell that Saint Isaac was a member of the Old Gods. It was too direct, too sudden, without even a hint of a twist. How to describe it? It's a bit like a child who isn't good at socializing, being forced by their parents to make some friends. They're practically confiding in him, which is a bit hard to accept. Braun's expression suddenly stiffened. Without a word, he silently turned his head, pointed to the stairs ahead, and said, "Ahem. We're almost there." After saying that, he quickened his pace, half walking and half running up the stairs. Could I have guessed right? Anson, raising an eyebrow, followed closely behind with a slightly strange expression. Outside the red carpet hall, Braun, hands behind his back, pushed open a side door on the right. The dim yellow light from the wall lamps created a warm atmosphere. The slightly cramped space was neatly arranged with a small two-seater sofa, a coffee table, and an elegant wine cabinet, creating a cozy ambience. "This is the red carpet hall's cloakroom, sometimes also used as a lounge," Braun said, pointing to a wall of built-in wardrobes and a full-length mirror beside him. "There are hooded robes there prepared in advance. Remember to wear one before entering the red carpet hall. Although this gathering is organized by the professor, not everyone here is a student like us. Many are scattered members of the Old Gods faction in Clovis, or simply outsiders interested in the three Old Gods. Although everyone understands this unspoken rule, the Old Gods are still a faith suppressed by secular society. Necessary concealment and self-protection are for the protection of oneself and others." That makes sense. Anson nodded, silently indicating his agreement. Braun, having finished his instructions, coughed lightly and left the dressing room. The two maintained a remarkable tacit understanding, pretending the earlier awkwardness hadn't occurred. Opening the wardrobe, Anson casually picked out a rather old and inconspicuous gray robe, concealing his face with a hood, and then gently pushed open the doors to the red carpet hall. Inside the spacious hall, a vibrant red carpet covered the entire floor and walls, each piece embroidered with intricate patterns in gold thread. The gold and red hues permeating the space constantly stimulated Anson's senses, even causing a dizzying, almost disorienting feeling. Click, Anson took a pocket watch from his coat pocket and gently pressed the cover. 5:30, Anson muttered to himself, silently surveying the entire red carpet hall. Perhaps because he had arrived a full hour early, the once empty hall was only dotted with a few scattered figures, each person bundled up tightly, as if unwilling to expose even an inch of skin. It's still winter, so this kind of gathering isn't a problem, but what will happen when the weather gets warmer? Anson, unable to suppress his inner grumbling, put away his pocket watch, sat down on a sofa near the edge, took a steaming cup of coffee from the dessert shelf to his right, and slowly began to plan for the day. The meticulously arranged room, the soft, comfortable sofa, and the specially prepared coffee and various snacks. This shouldn't be a secret gathering of an underground evil organization, but rather more like a secret club, otherwise there would be no need for such ostentatious extravagance. Anson could think of 3 reasons. First, of course, to increase the influence of the Dark Mage within the Old God faction in the capital. Second, to try and absorb fresh blood from the scattered spellcasters. And lastly, and most importantly, money. Organizing an underground evil organization requires a lot of money, personnel, strongholds, operations, intelligence, and information, far beyond what a history professor could afford. Even the most fanatical believers need to buy bread and pay rent. For a history professor who needs to conceal his identity, Mace Harner's options are probably limited. The simplest for him is probably donation. Although the Old Gods are a strictly forbidden faith throughout the entire Order world, their continued existence despite comprehensive suppression proves they still have a considerable following. Like certain clubs and secret societies that habitually create an air of mystery, they attract wealthy and leisurely nobles and rich people by packaging themselves as high-end, niche hardcore academic organizations, creating various special identities to earn their membership fees and donations. To ensure clients happily part with their money, a mysterious and comfortable environment is essential. The content of the conversation is irrelevant. The atmosphere is always paramount. After all, they're not there to teach, but to enjoy themselves. Although he hadn't thoroughly investigated the situation, based on his conversation with Brown and the environment he observed, Anson believed he had a pretty good idea of what was going on. In that case, gaining the trust of Black Mage Mace Harnard in this setting was simple: talk to as many people as possible and gather any meaningful information. Since this was his first time attending such a gathering, there was no need to stand out, he just needed to blend in. Having made up his mind, Anson leisurely put down his coffee cup and refocused his attention on the red carpet hall. As time ticked by, more and more figures entered the hall. Clearly divided into two categories, those entering from the side cloakrooms mostly wore hooded robes similar to Anson's, while those entering through the main entrance wore various clothing or masks that concealed their faces and upper bodies. It seems this is still how the Black Mage distinguishes between newcomers and veterans, Anson guessed. Of course, we also have to exclude those who prefer to be unconventional. You've kept us searching for you. A soft voice, tinged with a hint of complaint, rang in Anson's ears. He instinctively turned to look beside him. A purple figure gracefully sat down next to him, chest puffed out, head held high, staring straight ahead, pretending not to have spoken to him. The person wore a hooded robe similar to his own. Although he couldn't see their face clearly, judging from the slightly curled black hair peeking out from under the hood, the slightly curved figure beneath the robe, and the voice, it was likely a young girl. Just as Anson was feeling puzzled and trying to figure out what was going on, the girl, her gaze unwavering, spoke again. After so many years, you still seem to know everything about Clovis City. You're truly remarkable, Lord Draco Veltz. Chapter 92. I'm not interested. In that instant, Anson, expressionless, touched her forehead and remained silent. Had she mistaken her for some talkative novelist? Pressing her temples, Anson used her raised right arm to shield her face, trying to calm herself and consider a solution. For some reason, lately, the mere mention of Draco's name gave her an urge to punch someone. Faced with this unexpected situation, Anson could only think of two solutions in an instant. First, immediately clarify and tell her she had mistaken him for someone else, but this risked revealing her identity. Second, pretend to be some talkative novelist and try to extract information from her, but this was also very risky, as she could be easily exposed if she had even had contact with Draco once. No more thinking. Anson's eyes gleamed with a sharp light as she decisively chose the second option. Since this was an opportunity that had come knocking on her door, she couldn't let it slip away. She'd take the gamble. Having made up his mind, Anson coughed lightly, took a deep breath, and slowly straightened up, a confident smile playing on his lips. You don't need to explain. Before he could utter a second word, the girl, who hadn't looked at him, suddenly interrupted him in a low voice, her calm tone tinged with a slight tremor. I understand, people in your line of work can't reveal too much, otherwise there's a risk of exposing their identities. What line of work? A novelist who's afraid to reveal his identity. Is he afraid of being shot by readers? Anson remained silent, turning his head to the other side, avoiding the girl's gaze. But there's something else I'm very curious about. Why did you specifically choose to meet here? The girl, with her gentle voice, maintained her elegant posture, not moving an inch since she sat down. And, how do you know that I also have a membership in the secret society? That's impossible. No one else knows about this except Angelica. Could it be that you even bribed her? A hint of astonishment lingered in the girl's voice. Oh, so this really is a secret society? Anson, not daring to turn around, crossed his arms, his face filled with sudden realization. The girl, still seated, tensed slightly, as if suppressing her emotions. After a moment of silence, she whispered with a slight wheeze, I really didn't expect you to go this far. I'm warning you, although Father instructed us to have a cooperative relationship, that doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. Next time I catch you overstepping your bounds, don't expect me to show any mercy. Yes, don't be polite to him. Anson nodded frantically in his heart. As the start time of the party drew closer, the hall filled with more and more people. People wearing various hoods or masks enjoyed the comfortable sofas and exquisite snacks, chatting quietly or excitedly among themselves. The girl skillfully picked up a cup of coffee from the snack stand, her elegant and dignified demeanor showing great composure. Clearly, this wasn't her first time here. Just as Anson hesitated whether to risk exposure and continue trying to extract information from her, the girl suddenly put down her coffee cup. That's enough of the negotiation. Did you bring the things? Anson, who is about to speak, immediately fell silent again. Glancing sideways at the hesitant novelist, the girl snorted, her cherry lips hidden under her hood inadvertently curving upwards. HMPH. I didn't expect someone as audacious as you to be so cautious. Alright, I agree with you. A place like this, with so many people around, even if it's secluded enough, isn't a suitable place for a transaction. We can wait until the party is over to do it, but the price is that you must answer one question for me, the truth behind that bizarre murder on the Steel Sky. The moment the words fell, the silent Anson clearly heard a hint of excitement in the girl's voice. Before he could speak, the girl holding the coffee cup spoke with remarkable restraint. I already know the general outline of the incident. 13 guards officers, a lieutenant colonel and a captain, died in the first-class compartment, and the bodies of the other 11 were all found in another second-class carriage. Their times of death were roughly the same, and there were obvious signs of fighting and gunfire at the scene. One carriage even had no fewer than 30 bullet holes. The train conductor and the witnesses at the scene said, it was a revenge killing, but that was just a fabrication you made to cover it up, right? So how exactly did you manage to kill 13 guards officers silently, unnoticed by everyone on the entire train? The girl grew increasingly excited, even forgetting her initial restraint. Her eyes, seemingly gleaming, shone brightly in the shadows beneath her hood. Anson wondered if it was just his imagination, but he felt he had heard her excited tone and mannerisms somewhere before. For a moment, he frowned, lost in thought, a sense of unease creeping over him. The girl beside him clearly misunderstood his meaning. After waiting in vain, she withdrew her gaze, a slight disappointment in her soft snort. Oh, you don't want to say? Never mind, I never really wanted to know in the first place anyway. I just didn't want to embarrass you, so I gave you a way out. If you're unwilling, then forget it. By the way, let me tell you a little known fact. The Royal Guard has already started targeting you. Their first step is to control everyone who had contact with you on the Iron Sky, question them, follow them, arrest them, and force them to confess. It won't be long before they spill all the information about you. No matter how well you play your little tricks, you'll definitely be exposed eventually, and the Royal Guard will seize the opportunity to publish your story in the major newspapers. Of course, I personally have absolutely no interest in any of this. Yes, I know you're not interested, and you really don't need to repeat yourself. Anson continued to complain internally. But then certain guys will definitely be in trouble, because the Royal Guard will have a legitimate reason to arrest him. Neither the Privy Council nor certain powerful nobles and wealthy merchants will dare to save him, unless, the girl deliberately dragged out her words, a powerful force that isn't afraid of the Royal Guard and has absolutely no connection to the Privy Council is willing to lend a hand and save this guy's life from the clutches of death. As she spoke, she deliberately glanced at Draco beside her out of the corner of her eye, subtly hinting at something. Anson, sensing this hint, remained silent for a moment, then suddenly sighed. He felt a pang of reluctance. He felt that if he continued to remain silent, she would soon say everything she had to say. The slightly smug girl frowned slightly. Glancing at the sighing novelist, she had already said all this, so why was he still unmoved? Was the current situation entirely within his expectations? Was he deliberately allowed to be pursued by the Royal Guard in Clovis City to draw the attention of other forces? So, luring him here for negotiations was also part of his plan. Suddenly, the girl, seemingly realizing something, turned sharply, her eyes filled with tension, fear, and a hint of excitement and anticipation as she looked at Anson. Her body, shrouded in her robes, began to tremble slightly with excitement. What's wrong with her? Feeling the sudden and particularly complex gaze beside him, Anson, who had remained silent, suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Whoosh, the several giant chandeliers illuminating the entire red carpet hall turned and went out, plunging the enclosed hall into darkness. The next second, several candles burning with purplish-red flames appeared on the previously empty central altar. A tall, slender figure dressed in a dark blue tuxedo and a top hat appeared in the center of the candlelight, most of his face obscured by the hat and monocle. "Gentlemen, Welcome to this little gathering. He sat on an armchair, his long, slender left leg casually crossed so that he could rest his hands, folded over each other, on his knee. I am the Black Mage. Chapter 93. 3 Questions. The gentle, refined voice seemed to possess a certain magic, instantly silencing the noisy hall. Pairs of eyes, filled with curiosity and astonishment, turned to the tall, slender figure seated in the crimson candlelight. He bowed slightly, his blood-red pupils, hidden beneath a top hat and monocle, scrutinizing each guest. As his gaze swept over Anson, it paused almost imperceptibly. Anson, keenly aware of this, nodded back discreetly, concealing the surprise in his eyes. Yes, although his appearance and voice had completely changed, it was indeed Professor Mace Hornard. The last time he had appeared before him in this form was in the dream during the siege of Thunder Castle. So it was possible in reality too? Changing voice and appearance, was it also a power of dark magic? How about that, surprised, aren't you? At this moment, the girl sitting to the side suddenly spoke up. He is the Black Mage, currently the most outstanding and famous spellcaster in the entire city of Clovis. It is rumored that the Royal Guard has tried to capture him more than once to restore his already precarious reputation, even going so far as to frame him for many unsolved murders, but each time they failed. But what those foolish Royal Guards never expected was that the Black Mage, whom they regarded as a ghost, actually holds such a gathering regularly every month at St. Isaac Academy. The girl gently raised her right hand, concealing the contemptuous smile on her lips. The so-called most dangerous place is the safest place, holding a secret gathering between the old gods in the highest academy of the Church of Order, and never being detected from beginning to end, is simply like magic. That's right, as magical as the behavior of a certain guy in the Iron Sky. Of course. I'm just using an analogy, I'm not particularly interested in that matter. The elegantly seated girl shifted her gaze from Anson, not forgetting to add, Anson. At this moment, the Black Mage, seated in the center of the red carpet hall, spoke softly. Well then, like the opening of every gathering, I will first answer the 3 questions raised by everyone at the last gathering. New members, if you have any questions or need help, you can leave a note on the refreshment stand, or wait until the break to discuss it privately. When he said new members, Anson clearly felt the Black Mage's gaze sweep over him. Was this the teacher warning the students to be quiet and pay attention in class? Anson smiled knowingly. The first question, the Black Mage, speaking softly, raised a note with a sheen of parchment in his right hand and lit it in the crimson candlelight. Whoosh, the burning paper instantly turned to ash, the embers forming an elegant string of characters in mid-air. Aten, the Master of Fate, is the last old god to appear. There are many theories about Aten's origin. Some believe he was born from the chaos of hope and despair. Others believe he is the embodiment of wisdom, knowing the fate of all things. Some even believe that, as one of the 3 old gods, the Master of Fate, Aten is the only old god who has not fallen, that he still exists in some form, and grants those who discover his true form the power of divination and prophecy. As a follower of the 3 old gods, I regret to inform you, this is not the case. The black-haired wizard's gentle voice, carrying a captivating magic, echoed in the red carpet hall. It is not that I know the whereabouts of the fallen 3 old gods, but rather that the Master of Fate, Aten, does not possess the power to foresee the future. No god, or any great being touted by charlatans, can grant humanity the power of prophecy or divination. Followers of the old gods, remember this well. For thousands of years since the Dark Ages, humanity has held its destiny firmly in its own hands. The voice, though not loud, clearly carried the words to everyone's ears. Amidst a chorus of soft sighs, the sharp-eyed Anson noticed a man wearing a golden mask sitting on the sofa in front of him. He let out a slightly displeased, yet undeniably cold snort. Judging from the voice, he was a middle-aged man. So, he was the one who had asked the question. Anson nodded slightly, understanding the rules and purpose of this segment. The 3 questions were randomly selected from the slips of paper left by everyone at the last gathering, providing a wide range of possibilities. In fact, if the Black Mage wanted, he could simply choose one that no one had mentioned before, since no one knew what was written on other people's slips. This segment also enhanced interactivity, and the authoritative answers further attracted more people. By observing the reactions of those present, the identity of the questioner could be deduced, a double benefit. Now, here's the second one. The Black Mage held up the second slip of paper. Does a hierarchy exist among spellcasters? Almost the instant he opened his mouth, Anson noticed a person sitting very close to the altar, wearing a robe similar to his own, leaning slightly forward, even pulling out shorthand paper and pen from their pocket. Seems like a good student who enjoys keeping a diary. My answer is, yes, there are indeed hierarchical distinctions among spellcasters who believe in the three old gods. The black mage's answer ended abruptly, without further explanation. Disappointed sighs echoed throughout the silent, dark hall, but no one stood up to object or urge the black mage to continue. Clearly, this wasn't the first time such a situation had occurred. This confirmed Anson's own suspicion. For Professor Mace Hornard, the black mage, this secret club was merely a club. The information revealed was limited to educational content, the truly core secrets only touched upon, used to package his mysterious, high-end, and hardcore image. After a long sigh, the dark mage, seated on the sofa, spoke again, and then, the last one. According to the original plan, I was going to explain to you the differences between the three old gods, and the origins of the decline of the old gods' faith, but, adjusting his monocle, the dark mage changed the subject. For some reason, I'll leave the last question to a current event that's attracting a lot of attention, a bizarre murder case that happened on the steam train Iron Sky. Almost as soon as the dark mage spoke, Anson, feeling the gaze directed at him, shivered violently. The girl, maintaining her composed posture, was first startled, then slowly turned her head, scrutinizing the trembling novelist with a playful yet cold gaze. Chapter 94 Acting. In the dimly lit, mysteriously eerie red carpet hall, a playful smile curled at the corner of the young girl's lips as she looked at the novelist who avoided her gaze. Yes, Draco Veltz, I've seen through your tricks. Regarding the recent sensational train murder case, which has made headlines in many newspapers, the dark wizard said, his arms crossed, elbows resting on the armrests of his chair, obscuring his expression. For reasons I cannot disclose to you, I conducted some investigation. At that moment, a bead of cold sweat trickled down the forehead of the slightly agitated girl. The suspect is a novelist named Draco Veltz, who solved the case solely through observation and communication, because it was all his doing. The girl's breathing quickened, her eyes, gleaming with an eerie light, fixed intently on Anson, as if he might vanish with a poof at any moment. Because the case is so bizarre and the explanation so far-fetched, rumors of old gods' intervention have arisen. That's right. That's exactly it. Draco Veltz wasn't alone, which is why he was able to commit such a shocking murder so quietly. He wasn't alone. And now I tell you all, the protagonist of this bizarre murder case, Lord Draco Veltz, is also a spellcaster. He should have nothing to do with the old gods, and he certainly can't be a spellcaster. Anson and the girl, each lost in their own thoughts, simultaneously showed expressions of surprise. Because a proper follower of the old gods would never expose themselves so easily, the dark mage spoke softly, his gaze sweeping over all the members of the gathering. And this ignorant and foolish world often resorts to heresy, curses, and magic to phenomena they don't understand or know the reasons for. That is a pathetic prejudice. As he finished speaking, the dark mage, sitting in the center of the crimson candlelight, lowered his head slightly and said no more. A moment later, some of the party members who had been listening attentively were still reflecting on what had just happened. Some began whispering among themselves, and others simply got up and left, walking alone or in small groups towards more secluded seats and the cloakroom. 3 questions were over, and now it was time for a break. Anson silently observed his surroundings, wondering to himself. This also meant that if he wanted to continue this charade and extract more information, he had to make a deal with the girl beside him. But he really didn't know what she and that chatterbox were going to trade. What should he do? Should he self-destruct? Or try to cover it up? Feeling the increasingly enthusiastic gaze beside him, Anson found it increasingly difficult to remain calm. In fact, at this point, he had obtained almost all the information he needed, and even roughly figured out the girl's identity. She had a deal with Draco Veltz, wasn't afraid of the royal guard, and didn't belong to the Privy Council. In the entire kingdom of Clovis, only 2 forces fit both criteria, the church and the royal family. No wonder that chatterbox dared to confront the royal guard alone. He'd already planned his escape route. As for the girl's purpose in coming here, since even the royal guard has discovered the existence of the black mage and the old gods, it's only a matter of time before the other forces in Clovis City become aware. So, should he reveal his identity and tell her he's not Draco? She's already practically laid bare her entire background. Telling her sorry, You've got the wrong person at this point seems inappropriate. And in his current state, escaping from under her nose is absolutely impossible. What should he do? Just then, a figure in a blue robe passed by Anson, casually leaving a folded note on the pastry stand in front of him. Only after the person left did Anson notice that the stand was almost completely filled with notes of various sizes. Anson raised an eyebrow and casually picked up a slip of paper. A line of hastily written notes caught his eye. 4 clues about dark magic. Those interested please go to the sofa in the second to last row from the left. So that's what they call break time, huh? Anson suddenly understood. This secret club not only had authoritative dark mages to educate them, but also allowed members to communicate privately, so that's why they needed to turn off the lights and wear clothes or masks to conceal their identities? If that's the case, could he also get some information about spellcasters or even spellbooks from here? Anson's eyes lit up, and he eagerly opened the second and third slips of paper, pointing valuable family heirloom books, price 5 gold coins, second-hand apartment for sale. Those interested please meet in person at the cloakroom at 7:20, buying anonymous train tickets, carriages, and other means of transportation, processing various urgent certificates, comprehensive service, fair prices. Was he thinking of this club a little too high-end? Flipping through the slips of paper in his hand, which looked like street advertisements, Anson was a little bewildered. After about half a minute, he finally found one that seemed somewhat reliable among the pile of advertisements, selling the spellbook, Sharp Wind, price 2 gold coins. Those interested, please enter the left-hand cloakroom at 7:30. Just as Anson was still searching through the pile of slips of paper, the somewhat anxious girl beside him began to frequently glance at him out of the corner of her eye. What on earth is this guy doing? Even Angelica has been bribed, proving that this isn't his first time here, yet he's still acting like a newbie, searching through those useless slips of paper. Is this also part of his disguise? Sigh, what an overly cautious guy. Taking a sip of coffee, the girl, who sees through everything, revealed a smug smile, and began to observe the novelist's acting skills even more carefully. He seemed to have found a deal that interested him. He looked around, not forgetting to fold the remaining slip of paper and put it back neatly. A good disguise, very fitting for a newcomer here for the first time. He didn't even overlook such small details, regulars would never notice. Just as the girl was lost in thought, Anson, curled up at the other end of the sofa, suddenly folded a slip of paper, gently placed it between the two of them, and then quickly got up and left. The girl quickly picked up the paper, using her coffee cup to cover it as she unfolded it in front of her. 7:40, transaction in the left-hand cloakroom. The girl's eyes lit up. So that's how it is. Pretending to be a newcomer here for the first time, quietly avoiding everyone's attention, and then completing the transaction at the least noticeable moment. Even in such a secretive gathering, he didn't forget to hide his identity. Draco Veltz. No wonder you managed to slip away right under the noses of the royal guard. She turned her head sharply, her gaze quickly sweeping behind her. The novelist standing in the shadows pushed open the door, glanced back at her and nodded slightly, then silently walked into the dressing room. Chapter 95 Anson's Escape Route. After nodding to Professor Mace Harnard as a perfunctory farewell, Anson closed the door and carefully confirmed it was locked before turning to walk into the dressing room. Inside the narrow, dimly lit room, a man dressed in a church-style robe and wearing a mask that only revealed his eyes sat at a coffee table under a wall lamp, his hands resting somewhat uneasily on the table, clutching a scroll with a sheen of parchment. You want to buy the spellbook of Sharp Wind? The man looked at Anson, who had entered the room and sat down opposite him. His slightly shrill voice betrayed his surprise. Judging from his voice, he was young, probably no more than 30. That's right, Anson nodded, his gaze, hidden under his hood, sweeping over the pocket watch in his right hand. Is there a problem? No, nothing. The masked man shook his head repeatedly, laughing frantically as if in a panic. I'm just a little surprised that someone would actually buy this. What I mean is, although it's a secret gathering hosted by dark mages, everyone is still quite wary of each other. Few spellcasters dare to trade in a place like this, exchanging information and research insights, handling things they wouldn't normally dare to do openly. That's basically the limit. If I weren't really short on cash, I wouldn't dare risk taking out the spellbook. The masked man shook his head, saying somewhat helplessly. Anson silently nodded in understanding, then secretly glanced at the pocket watch in his hand. Although the kingdom of Clovis's faith in the Ring of Order was far less devout than that of the Empire, it remained quite strict on matters of principle such as the old gods. If it weren't for the fear of being arrested and put on a steam valve by the Church of Order, Anson wouldn't have so readily pledged allegiance to Archbishop Ludwig, the Archbishop's own son. In comparison, the fact that the other party, a member of the old gods, dared to appear at the church academy was already considered quite courageous. Before the formal transaction, allow me a few more minutes to introduce myself, the masked man said softly, his voice slightly nervous. First, let me clarify that I'm not a member of the old gods faction. Although I am indeed a low-level spellcaster, there were other reasons for that, and this spellbook, I acquired from a bankrupt guy. It's not mine, so you don't need to worry about anyone using it to cause you trouble. One more thing, the masked man added, for a spellcaster like you attending a gathering for the first time, without backing or a powerful organization like the Dark Mages, the mere faction knowing you possess a spellbook will attract attention. Therefore, very few spellcasters dare to easily part with a spellbook. Anson couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. How did you know this is my first time here? Well, the masked man was startled at first, then smiled sheepishly, mainly because this isn't my first time selling spellbooks here. If you were really interested, you would have bought them 2 or 3 months ago. Besides, low-level spells like Sharp Wind or Gathering Flame are restrictive, cumbersome, and their power is less than ideal. Only beginners would be interested. Even so, I won't lower the price. 2 gold coins, not a penny less. I desperately need the money right now, the masked man insisted. Anson, without a word, pulled a 2 gold coin note from his pocket and placed it on the table. The 2 eyes behind the mask instantly widened. By the primordial ring, the man exclaimed, handing over the scroll he had been clutching. Then, as if afraid Anson might change his mind, he quickly took the banknotes, neatly folded them, and carefully placed them in his innermost pocket, gently patting it. Ahem. Seeing how readily you agreed, I can answer 2 more questions. Ask away. I'll answer anything I know, except for inquiries about your identity. He was quite cautious, which was understandable. Anson thought for a moment and then immediately spoke softly. The first question, the effect of the spell, Sharp Wind. You really want to ask that? The man glanced at Anson. You'll find out when you get back and examine the scroll. Why ask me here? I'm a very curious person. I don't like waiting. Anson offered a reason that wasn't really a reason. Alright, since you insist, the man shrugged, speaking nonchalantly. Like most ordinary spells, Sharp Wind is a spell that requires imprinting to take effect. Its effect is to make the target object as sharp as a sword for 5 to 15 seconds after the spell is cast, and the sharpness depends mainly on the effectiveness of your spell. Anything? Anson pressed. Anything is fine, the man nodded, chuckling softly. If you like, you can imprint it on your fist or head, the effect is the same. It's a pretty useless spell anyway. Useless, exactly. Think about it, these days you can kill someone with just a pistol. Why would you need magic? Besides, if you shoot someone, at most the royal guard will come to arrest you, but if even the slightest trace of magic is found on the corpse, then it'll be the order of judgment from the Church of Order. The man sighed and waved to Anson. I'm not going to say anything more, lest you regret it. Next question, I want to ask about the Black Mage's answer earlier. Anson paused for a few seconds before speaking. He specifically changed the third question to the murder case on the Iron Sky. Has this matter had a significant impact on the Old Gods faction in Clovis City? Of course, the man replied without hesitation. 13 Royal Guard officers, dead without a sound on a steam train full of people. Anyone's first thought would be magic or the Old Gods, including us Old Gods, but we're at war right now. The moment the slightest news of Old Gods activity came from Thunder Fortress, the Knights of Judgment pounced like mad dogs. If the murderer on the train really was some blind spellcaster, the first to want to kill that idiot would be the Old Gods in the capital. Is it that serious? Anson Bach, the blind fool, was a little surprised. Of course it's serious. This could jeopardize the very survival of the entire Old God faction in the capital, the masked man said solemnly. Just think about how many innocent Old God believers will be harmed by the Church and the Royal Guard in their efforts to capture this fool. The Black Mage and the secret club of St. Isaac's Academy are quite well known within the Old God faction in the capital. His special appearance today to explain is probably to put our minds at ease, right? Maybe it's not just for that. Anson thought to himself. The transaction was complete, and the two remained silent for a while longer at the coffee table. The masked man got up first, pushed open the door, and returned to the red carpet hall. Anson, still in the cloakroom, poured himself a glass of rum from the wine rack, adopting an unhurried posture. The man standing outside closed the door behind him, and the dimly lit cloakroom returned to silence. Anson pulled out his pocket watch again. The time was 7:29, 11 minutes left until his appointment with the girl who had her eye on the talkative novelist. Click. Anson abruptly yanked open the wardrobe beside him, threw his robe inside, and strode towards the door leading directly out of the red carpet hall. He had to leave St. Isaac's Academy within 11 minutes. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 96 I Want to Live. Carefully closing the door to the dressing room, Anson dashed down the spiral staircase of the tower at top speed, running down the deep corridor towards the academy gates without looking back. He only had 11 minutes. In 11 minutes, the girl would discover that there was no one in the dressing room and immediately realize she had been tricked. Time was of the essence, but Anson wasn't afraid, nor was he flustered at all. Although he couldn't rule out the possibility that the girl possessed some special bloodline power or was also a spellcaster, this was St. Isaac Academy, inside the Black Mages' secret club. Unless she was willing to anger both organizations to capture him, he could only use the most basic conventional method, running. However, this early departure would definitely displease Professor Mace Hornard, the Black Mage, but he could deal with that later. Today he had obtained two very important pieces of information. First, a certain talkative novelist had found a backer to support his overthrow of the Royal Guard. Second, besides the Royal Guard, other forces in Clovis City had begun to notice the existence of the Black Mage. With these two pieces of information, he could gain enough trust among the Dark Mages and underground evil organizations, if such a luxury as trust truly existed in this kind of place. Humming a light-hearted tune, Anson, who had been jogging all the way, finally stood outside the gates of St. Isaac's Academy. Standing on the street lit only by gas lights, the cheerful Anson suddenly realized a very serious problem. There weren't many horse-drawn carriages left on the street at this hour. So, it seemed he couldn't get back. Would he have to walk back? St. Isaac's Academy was actually quite remote. Walking back to Bowman Street from here, he probably wouldn't get home until midnight. And he hadn't even had dinner. Walking home on an empty stomach on such a cold night, wasn't that a bit too pathetic for someone who had just made such a fruitful trip? The cold wind howled through the empty street, making Anson, who was wrapped tightly in his coat and had his hands in his pockets, shiver. Sensing something amiss, Anson suddenly turned to look at the deserted street. His right thumb, tucked into his pocket, lightly snapped his index finger together, producing a soft click. A sharp pain shot through his temple, and the scene within a 20-meter radius instantly flashed into his mind. This was the secret technique he'd learned from Braun, using a small movement as a switch to control the activation and deactivation of spellcasters and their abilities, concealing his spellcaster identity when unnecessary. Initially, Anson planned to use some small tool, like smoking or wearing glasses, but the former was harmful to health, and the latter, unlocking his abilities by removing glasses, felt too surreal. Although in this world and era, it was unlikely that someone in a cloak and bodysuit would sue him for copyright infringement, he ultimately chose the simpler method of snapping his fingers. He was being watched. 11. Their clothing and attire slightly different. Besides the Royal Guard, were others lying in wait for him? But daring to shoot and kill near St. Isaac's Academy, weren't they truly unafraid of the Church of Order? They were scattered, and the streets were empty, offering no cover whatsoever. Acting rashly would mean being riddled with bullets. Standing in the cold wind, Anson remained calm, quickly assessing the situation. He couldn't act rashly for now. He needed to find a way to induce someone to fire first, then see if he could create an opportunity to disrupt the situation, or wait for a carriage to pass before making a move. Just then, a series of hurried footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Stop! The girl who had been running frantically stood behind Anson, panting, raising her sidearm and pointing it at the back of his head. Her slightly hesitant voice was filled with grief and indignation. You liar, how dare you deceive me? Wasn't that a bit too easy to misunderstand? Clearing his throat, Anson remained calm and said, My esteemed lady, I admit I made some mistakes, but to be honest, I didn't lie to you. Shut up. The girl's right hand cocked the hammer of her revolver, Her elegant yet sharp voice dripping with murderous intent. "You damned old god scum, daring to impersonate Draco Veltz, trying to extract information from me. HMPH. I must admit you did a great job. Very well, you almost fooled me, so close, you cunning scum. Want to know where you slipped up? Hands up, turn around. Could you just pretend this never happened if I said no?" Slightly exasperated, Anson raised his hands above his head and slowly turned around. Standing before him was a girl wearing an exquisite boat-shaped hat and a sophisticated black silk satin dress, understated yet luxurious. Her long, slightly wavy black hair cascaded naturally over her shoulders, and a pair of eyes filled with anger were set in her doll-like, exquisite face, her upturned red lips carrying a hint of arrogant smugness. Anson wasn't sure if it was just his imagination, but the girl before him seemed vaguely familiar. "Your disguise is perfect. Even this gathering has become your cover. No one who has never seen Draco Veltz would suspect you in the slightest." The girl, oblivious to Anson's thoughts, laughed, as if she had the conman in her grasp. "But unfortunately, even with all your scheming and cleverly extracting information from me, you still made a mistake." As if deliberately showing off, the girl held up her irrefutable evidence. "A single hair. There's a black hair in the hood of your robe in the dressing room, but Draco Veltz has red hair. You never expected to be exposed because of such a small oversight, you shameless and cunning old god's member." "Yes, I really never expected that I would be discovered because of this." Looking at the spoils of war in the other's hand, Anson nodded seriously. "That's right, you're truly amazing, but I have one small question. Since you've already decided I'm an old god's member, do you really think you can catch me with just that little toy in your hand?" Anson countered, his mind constantly scanning the dozen or so figures lurking around them. The guard hiding behind the gaslighter pole was talking to the person next to him with a surprised expression. His gaze was probably directed in their direction just now, right? What's going on? Could it be that the two groups lurking around aren't together? A tiny toy. The girl narrowed her eyes slightly, her upturned red lips curving into a deeper smile. "As expected, the old gods are all incredibly stubborn and confident. I'm really curious, when you're tied to the exhaust valve of a steam engine, will you still be as confident as you are now? Or perhaps you'll perform a magic trick and slip away right under the nose of the executioner knight." Someone moved. Anson raised an eyebrow, twisting his left wrist, the hilt of a bayonet hidden in his sleeve slightly exposed. The next second, the girl suddenly raised her gun and took a half step back, her eyes flashing with resolute brilliance. "Everyone, attack, I want him alive." Chapter 97. Two groups of people. The moment the words left his mouth, four guards emerged from the corner and shadows, their black gun barrels simultaneously aimed at Anson, who had raised his hands. Looking at Anson, now surrounded, she exhaled softly, like a girl who had finally avenged herself, a somewhat sinister smile appearing on her doll-like face. So, before handing him over to the Judgment Knights, how should she punish this guy? Anson, his expression unchanged, mentally replaying the surrounding scene. At that very instant, a flash of light suddenly appeared on the street. Bang! Amidst the deafening roar of gunpowder, a lead bullet whistled through the air from the shadows, grazing the empty street and striking the girl opposite him from behind. The girl's eyes widened. The gunshot was so sudden that she didn't realize what had happened until the next second. "Cease fire!" The girl screamed in alarm and anger at the figure opposite her, instinctively glancing behind her. "Didn't I say I was going to capture this?" Her words trailed off. A guard who had followed her was struck down by the lead bullet, his crimson blood seeping into the cracks between the bricks beneath his convulsing body. Just as she turned her head, Anson, who had remained motionless, suddenly lunged forward, embracing the girl and throwing herself into the pool of blood. The girl, too preoccupied to scream, was pinned to the ground by Anson's sudden attack. Only when her back touched the cold ground and the stench of blood did she realize she had been kidnapped. The next second, dozens of gunshots illuminated the street in the night. "Damn it, there's an ambush. That old god has kidnapped the young lady. I see those scum. Take cover." A dense barrage of gunfire erupted, accompanied by screams and angry roars from all around, the golden-red flashes of gunfire and acrid smoke alternating and billowing amidst the shouts. Clang! A crisp sound rang out as Anson, who was pressing down on her, swiftly flipped his left hand, using the bayonet hidden in his sleeve to deflect the gun before the girl could fire. Simultaneously, he pressed down on her other left hand, which was still trying to grab her throat. The terrified and enraged girl was completely under Anson's control, able only to clench her teeth and glare at him hatefully. "I'm sorry, lovely lady, I understand how you feel," Anson tried to communicate with her. "Really?" Suppressing her inner fear, the furious girl revealed a slightly sinister smile. "The perpetrator can understand the victim's feelings? A gentlemanly liar like you. I've never seen anything like it before. Oh, first of all, I never intended to kidnap you in the first place. You were the one who insisted on arresting me. Secondly, so it was my fault for being caught by you. Secondly, those people outside who killed your guards weren't with me." Anson suppressed the urge to roll his eyes and said, "If I hadn't reacted quickly enough, we would both be riddled with bullets. Not counting any possible reinforcements, there are at least 7 of them, and your remaining 3 guards won't last long. Let's concentrate our forces to take them down first, and then consider the rest, okay?" The embarrassed and angry girl glared at Anson, who was on top of her, without saying a word. If you don't answer, I'll take that as a yes." "We don't have much time," Anson asked tentatively. There's only one question," suppressing her anger. The girl's chest heaved. "Who are they?" That's easy to answer." Anson straightened up with a long breath. His right hand, which had released the girl's wrist, drew his sidearm from his back waist and pointed it decisively at a 45-degree angle behind him without turning his head. Bang! A lead bullet shot out from the muzzle flash, and the guy who had just peeked out from behind the 2 was instantly shot in the head. The figure in the bloodstained uniform fell straight down beside the girl, making her body tremble. "They are the guards." Major David's face was very ugly. Of course, considering that half of Major David's face was swollen, his nose was broken, and even 2 teeth were broken, his face could not be called good at all. His light gray eyes were fixed on the corpse that had been shot to death. At least a dozen lead bullets had pierced through the chest, and the gushing blood soaked through the pure black wool coat with a ring of order embroidered on the collar. The ring of order. These people are from the church? Besides the Royal Guard, now even the Church of Order has its eye on Anson Bach's trail. Major David, with his hooked nose, breathed heavily, caught in a dilemma. If he forcibly arrested Anson Bach here, he would definitely anger the Church of Order, and he, a mere major, didn't have that kind of authority. But if he let him go now, this most likely lead to Draco Veltz would be seized by the Church of Order, and all his efforts so far would be in vain. That Anson Bach wasn't stupid. He must have guessed that he was the one who ambushed him, and he would definitely seize this opportunity like a lifeline, exchanging all the information he had for the church's protection. Damn it, how did things get so complicated? Major David, clenching his teeth, leaned heavily against the lamppost behind him, his mind a complete mess. Bang! Bang! The crisp gunshots rang out as 2 lead bullets struck the lamppost behind the hook-nosed man, the sparks flying and the lamppost trembling slightly, sending a shiver through him. The 2 remaining church guards were surrounded on 3 sides by the Royal Guard, desperately holding the ground and providing cover for each other with intermittent fire, but the overwhelming numerical superiority prevented them from even getting close. Unbeknownst to them, the enemy was even more conflicted, especially after learning that they had just killed members of the church, and was relentlessly trying to force a retreat with overwhelming firepower. Damn it, are these guys all insane? A guardsman standing next to the hook-nosed officer cursed, firing at the enemy while glancing at his side. But Major David, do we really have to kill them? I mean, they're from the church, so what if they're from the church? Major David glared at him fiercely. Besides, we've already killed their comrades. Do you think letting 2 of them go back will make the Church of Order forgive us? What a joke. Think of what happened to St. Isaac. Magnanimity has never been associated with the Church of Order. The hook-nosed officer's face was contorted with rage, his rapidly beating heart making his swollen cheeks burn. Kill them as quickly as possible. Capture Anson Bach and that woman who's been tailing them, then there'll be room for negotiation. Yes, sir. Despite their trepidation, the guardsmen carried out their commander's orders without hesitation. Bang! Just as Major David was about to rush forward, a gunshot rang out from a distance. He instinctively stopped, trying to dodge, but heard a sharp cracking sound above him, and his vision went completely dark. The gunshot had been at least 20 meters away. The enemy had hit the gas lamp above him with a revolver from 20 meters away. Slightly startled, Major David jerked his head up, desperately adjusting to the sudden darkness, looking in the direction of the gunshot. A figure in a military overcoat was standing a full 20 meters away, holding a revolver, smiling at him. Chapter 98 Perfect Teamwork. The moment he saw the other person's smiling face, Major David's expression changed drastically, and he immediately lunged forward, crawling for cover. Bang! A flash of golden red flame streaked past, and the lead bullet that had nearly pierced his skull grazed Major David's left cheek, tearing a gash in his eyeball and skin, blood mixed with bits of flesh flowing down his swollen face. The excruciating pain, like a bullet piercing his skull, throbbed through Major David's skull. Enduring the agony, he immediately rolled to his left the instant he lunged forward. Bang! 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 One lead bullet after another grazed his body, exploding in flashes of light on the cobblestones he rolled across, like the footsteps of a hunter. At the same time, the remaining 5 guards were completely drawn to the girl's 2 bodyguards. Anson, with his left hand in his pocket and a revolver in one hand, slowly approached Major David under the gas lamp post. The hook-nosed officer rolled, lunged, and crawled frantically, desperately dodging the relentless barrage of lead bullets. His single eye gleamed with terror, unable to tear its gaze from the approaching figure. Click, that was the sound of an empty magazine. He was out of bullets. Major David, acutely aware of the crisp sound, jolted to his feet, practically scrambling to his feet, and decisively drew his rifle and fired. Anson, having emptied his magazine, didn't hesitate, charging straight at the hook-nosed officer. Bang! Bang! In the pitch-black night, a revolver at 20 meters was practically useless for accuracy, but a person sprinting 20 meters would only take a few seconds, no matter how slow. Clang! In a moment of panic, the hook-nosed officer barely managed to block the bayonet that was about to pierce his body with his rifle. Just as he was about to draw his dagger, Anson's fist was already aimed at his face. Damn it! Major David slid backward to dodge Anson's punch, simultaneously gripping the hilt of his knife with his left hand and thrusting it forward the instant it was drawn. Anson, unfazed, as if he had anticipated this, cleaved the dagger off his rifle with his bayonet, smashing it away. This type of dagger, designed for easy carrying, was merely a temporary, emergency weapon, incomparable to a military bayonet in both length and quality. Clang! A crisp sound rang out, and dazzling sparks burst forth between the two. Exhausted from parrying, Major David had no time for a full-scale attack, retreating and dodging repeatedly. In just a few dozen seconds, he nearly brushed past a gleaming bayonet countless times, each time narrowly avoiding a fatal blow. The excessively dangerous and frequent attacks almost gave him the illusion that his opponent was doing this on purpose. Is he planning to capture me alive? No, how could that be? Major David, who had been shocked countless times in that brief moment, gritted his teeth and roared behind him, Anson Bach is here, get him from me. The frantic shouts echoed through the street as 4 guards, who had been cooperating in the attack on the church's protectors, abandoned their enemy and flanked from both sides, revolvers in hand. Moving in pairs, maintaining a synchronized pace, they didn't immediately fire after confirming the hook-nosed officer was engaged in close combat. Instead, they drew their daggers and swiftly engaged him from the left and right, one at long range and the other at close range. Their coordination impeccable. Clang! Seizing the opportunity, Major David swung his dagger sharply in a backhand motion, barely blocking Anson's bayonet thrust just before he could. Anson, stopping in his tracks, immediately noticed the enemy on his left lunging at him simultaneously, while the one on his right raised his sidearm, aiming at his torso. In that instant, he was simultaneously attacked from 5 directions by enemies at varying distances. Anson had to admit that compared to the scum of the first platoon, these guardsmen were completely inferior in quality and training, not even comparable. If the conscription force had had 3 skirmish regiments of this caliber, they probably could have taken Thunder Fortress in less than 19 days. Even in the regular army, they would be considered elite skirmishers. Seeing the sneer on the hook-nosed officer's face, Anson calmly lunged forward, narrowly avoiding a dagger from his side and rear. Just as the 2 figures brushed past each other, Anson turned to his left without warning. The bayonet that the hook-nosed officer had deflected slid off the dagger's blade and ripped open the guardsman's throat. In the instant blood gushed out, a dazzling flash of gunfire illuminated behind Anson. Bang! Almost simultaneously with a gunshot, Anson kicked the corpse towards the firing guardsman, snatched the dagger from the body, and decisively threw it to another man who was still hesitating whether to fire. Thud! A cold glint flashed, and the gleaming blade plunged into the guard's forehead. His body, suddenly powerless, collapsed to the ground along with his pistol. The guard, knocked down by the corpse, finally rose under the cover of his comrade. The remaining two immediately adjusted their positions, switching sides. Seizing this opening, Anson, gripping the dagger in reverse, charged head-on into the hook-nosed officer's midsection. A flicker of terror crossed Major David's grinning eyes as he instinctively tried to retreat. In that instant, Anson preemptively grabbed his right hand holding the gun, simultaneously flashing behind Major David and, like embracing a lover, tightly strangling his neck and arm from behind. Crack! A crisp snapping sound rang out, and Major David, his face contorted in pain, only had time to feel a piercing agony. His right arm had been broken. Releasing his severed arm, Anson snatched the pistol from the hook-nosed officer and fired 3 shots at the still panicked guard, emptying his magazine. The crisp impacts echoed against the guard's head and torso, like drumbeats to the muzzle flashes and his own screams, one to the forehead, one to the throat, one to the heart. Since his encounters with those who could dodge bullets out of thin air and couldn't be killed even with headshots, Anson had become much more cautious. He'd rather waste ammunition than compromise his safety. The screaming, convulsing body tumbled to the ground like a broken puppet, smearing his foul-smelling blood onto the cobblestones. "Stop. Don't move," the last remaining guard, terrified by the successive falls of his comrades and the hook-nosed officer, gripped his pistol tightly and pointed it at Anson. "Let go of Major David, or I'll shoot." "Oh, so this guy's a major?" Somewhat surprised, Anson discarded his empty revolver, pressed his bayonet against the hook-nosed officer's neck, and approached the guard step by step. "Stop. I said stop. Don't think I won't shoot just because you have a hostage. Back off, or try taking 2 more steps. Stop. Don't come any closer, or I'll really shoot." The terrified guard retreated repeatedly. The calm Anson controlled the still struggling hook-nosed officer, pressing closer step by step, his final plan already completed in his mind. First, the officer would succumb to the pressure and fire after 5 seconds. He could seize this opening to release Major David and subdue him. Second, the officer would try to resist. He could kill him and disarm him, but it would take at least 3 seconds, allowing Major David to try to escape. Third, he would seize the pistol from the officer and shoot Major David in the left calf, rendering him unable to escape. Excellent, perfect. A confident smile appeared on Anson's face. Bang! At that very moment, a gunshot rang out behind him. The terrified guardsman stared in disbelief, staggered, and collapsed to the ground. Anson, who hadn't had time to react, turned around to find a slightly panting girl standing behind him. She gave a light snort and looked at him with a nonchalant air. "You meant this when you said you wanted to cooperate, right?" Anson glanced at the smug expression on her face. Maybe a little different." "Different? No, you misheard." Anson looked again at the still smoking revolver in her hand, quickly assessing the possibility that the muzzle was pointed at him. "That's exactly what I meant." Chapter 99, a self-evident explanation. The battle ended even faster than Anson had planned. After the last unfortunate man was shot in the head by the girl, her remaining 2 guards had also swiftly finished their fight. One had been shot in the left arm, his right hand, holding a gun, constantly clutching his blood-soaked sleeve. The other showed no visible injuries, only a pale face, revealing exhaustion and weakness. They stood a few meters away, pistols hanging at their sides, pretending to patrol and be on guard, but always keeping their eyes within range of the girl and Anson. Anson was quite certain that if he got even slightly close or threatened this lady he somewhat recognized, they would promptly riddle him with bullets. Well, although he had a rough idea of the girl's identity, that wasn't important now. "You didn't kill him?" The girl's eyes showed surprise as she looked at the hook-nosed officer bound like a mummy on the ground. Anson nodded slightly, ignoring the pistol she pointed at him, his hands in his pockets. "He can't die." "Why?" "Because this is the inner city, and right outside the gates of St. Isaac's Academy," Anson explained patiently. "Just because no one's here now doesn't mean no one will be here later. 7 or 8 royal guards dead in a place like this can't be hidden. If there isn't even a single witness, it'll be on the front page of the newspapers tomorrow, and the royal guards will have a legitimate reason to arrest people." This was certainly one reason, but another was that Anson wasn't sure whether the ambush was unauthorized or if the royal guards had actually discovered the real culprit in the train murders. Although he hadn't left any clues on the Steel Sky, there was always a chance. "No, that's not what I'm asking." The wary girl changed her tone, showing no sign of putting down her revolver. "What I mean is, why would the royal guards ambush you here? Tell me the answer, or I'll hand you over to the Knights of Judgment immediately." "Lord Anson Bach." Click. The girl, her face now cold, was completely devoid of her earlier naivety. Her right hand, gripping the revolver tightly, cocked the hammer. She had indeed heard it. Looking at the dark muzzle pointed at her, Anson nodded and answered earnestly, "Would you like to hear the details or just the brief answer?" "Briefly, we don't have much time." Although still wary, the girl's tone softened. It was indeed difficult to harbor much hostility towards someone who had cooperated so readily from beginning to end, even saving her life in some way. Even if he was a cunning liar. Over the next few minutes, Anson roughly repeated his prepared answers, largely consistent with his responses during the guard's interrogation, while adding a few additional details. The girl's expression shifted from initial indifference to anger, and finally to astonishment and disbelief. So they're so eager to arrest you just because you and Draco Veltz were in the same compartment? I can't think of any other reason besides that, Anson shrugged, answering quite frankly. They seem to believe that the novelist is involved in the train murders, and then they assume I'm in cahoots with him. Even though I've explained it clearly to them, it doesn't seem to have worked. By the ring of order, how can I, a newly graduated officer from military academy, be causing trouble for the Royal Guard with a novelist I've just met? Anson grew increasingly agitated, his face showing utter disbelief, while subtly scrutinizing the girl's expression. The girl's expression shifted, though incredulous, it revealed no flaws. "Since you're just a newly graduated officer, then why are you here? Where are you?" Anson countered seriously. "Street. Isaac's Academy, or a secret meeting of the Black Mages Society. You must answer both," the girl said sternly. "No problem," Anson shrugged. "The answer is the same anyway, then why split it into two questions?" "To avoid you asking twice," Anson said matter-of-factly. "You said we don't have much time. Continue." The girl suddenly smiled sweetly, perfectly demonstrating what gritting her teeth meant with just a change in tone. "Before entering the Royal Military Academy, I was also a student at St. Isaac's Academy, and I was very interested in history." Anson pretended not to see the other person's expression and continued, "About a month ago, my professor from the academy sent me a letter, telling me that there would be a small history seminar at St. Isaac's Academy soon, and that I might as well attend if I had time. Later, when I returned to the capital, I ran into this professor again when I went to the military academy to pick up my graduation certificate. We chatted for a while, and he gave me the exact address and time of the gathering. I figured I had some free time anyway, so I decided to come." "Professor," the girl frowned slightly, as if she had thought of something. "Do you know his name?" "Of course," Anson said sincerely. "His name is Mace Hornard, a professor in the history department at St. Isaac's Academy. If you still don't believe me, you can ask Professor Eric at the military academy. I ran into the professor in his office that day." "So you didn't know it was a secret gathering of the old gods, and were just lured in by that professor?" "Of course I don't know. As a gifted individual who inherited the power of bloodline, a graduate of a military academy, how did I end up at this secret gathering as a member of the old gods? Then, when I asked you, why did you impersonate Draco Veltz and run away halfway through?" "Of course I ran away." Anson looked at her matter-of-factly. "I accidentally ended up at an old gods gathering, and even encountered a guy who mistook me for a suspect in the train murder case. If you were in his shoes, would you have stayed there?" The girl fell silent. She had to admit that his explanation was perfect, with almost no obvious flaws, and although their contact was brief, the guy in front of her didn't seem like a bad person. A young officer who was implicated and accidentally appeared at an old gods gathering due to being misled by others. There seemed to be nothing suspicious about him. "But I still can't let you leave." The girl hesitated slightly, but slowly lowered the revolver she had been holding. "Not only because your identity is suspicious, but also because if the Royal Guard finds out what happened tonight, they won't let you go. Come with me. I'll take you to a safe place and find someone wiser than me to decide what to do with you. But don't worry, I swear on my honor that unless there's solid evidence that you're a member of the old gods, no one can do anything to you." Anson nodded in agreement. "May I ask where you're taking me?" Chapter 100 Speaking without hesitation. Red Brick Street, Clovis Cathedral, Prayer Room 830. Alone on a cold wooden bench, aboard Anson idly toyed with his brass pocket watch, his eyes glued to the ticking hands. In his memory, this was the first time Anson Bach had visited this holy site of the Church of Order in the Kingdom of Clovis, not to withdraw money, but for some other purpose. Click. Anson, expressionless, gently closed the watch. Out of the corner of his eye, he quickly glanced at the prayer room door. A beautiful young woman with bright blonde hair, dressed in a black and white maid outfit, was walking briskly towards him. Mr. Anson Bach, yes, pretending not to notice the other person. Anson quickly stood up and put away his pocket watch. Excuse me, I am Mrs. Personal Maid, you can call me Angelica. The girl bowed gracefully, her lightly made-up face revealing a sweet smile with 8 teeth. As Miss has ordered, I will now lead the way for you. Finally, it's coming. Anson took a slight breath, trying to relax. Just as he was about to step away, he noticed that the maid opposite him did not turn around immediately, but stood there somewhat dazed, her emerald green eyes quickly scanning him. What's wrong? Anson raised an eyebrow. Oh, nothing, don't worry about it. A fleeting embarrassment appeared on the maid's face, and she stuck out her tongue somewhat shyly. This has nothing to do with you. I mean, it's all Angelica's fault, making you sit here for so long for nothing. She even forgot to lead you to the dressing room. The dressing room? Anson glanced down at his clothes, a dusty army overcoat, a slightly yellowed collar, and an officer's uniform he hadn't changed since getting off the train. It didn't seem quite right. Should I change? No need. For a young and promising officer like you, a little unkempt is a kind of fashion. The maid smiled and gently shook her head, her gaze sweeping over the mud and blood-stained floor. Besides, what you really need right now is a new pair of boots that fit. Anson Bach. Now please come with me, Miss is already waiting for you. With that, the smiling maid turned and walked towards the door, and Anson had no choice but to follow. Stepping on the hard floor, the two passed through the door of the prayer room and strolled down the corridor, dimly lit by the flickering gaslight. At the end of the corridor stood a large double-teak door carved with a relief of the Ring of Order. 2 miniature busts of Saint Isaac were placed on either side of the door, their steam cores replaced by shimmering light bulbs. A young girl, dressed in a looser long dress, stood with her arms crossed, seemingly lost in thought, directly beneath the sculpture. Mr. Anson Bach has arrived. The maid, with quick, light steps, trotted up to the girl. Time was short, and we didn't prepare any change of clothes for the guest. It's all right, he won't mind. The girl shook her head nonchalantly, gently grasping the maid's hands. Thank you for your hard work, Angelica. Now you can go directly to your room to rest. I'll arrange the rest of the work for others. You don't need to thank me, it's what Angelica should do. The maid smiled and curtsied, a hint of resentment in her emerald eyes. Just don't suspect that Angelica has been bribed by some man again next time. The flustered girl bit her lip, her face slightly flushed. The triumphant maid curtsied and skipped happily down the corridor. Anson, standing to the side, remained silent, suddenly noticing how interesting the wallpaper was and how nice the gas lamps were. All right, turn your head. The girl snorted coldly at Anson, her cheeks still slightly flushed. I've already explained the general situation, so you don't need to be too nervous later. Just tell the truth. Also, I'll go in with you. If there's anything you don't understand, I'll explain and supplement it for you, so don't worry. We just need some clues about Draco Veltz and your history professor, that's all. Understood? I will tell you everything I know. Anson nodded politely and pointed to the door beside him. The person in that room is, I said I would find someone wiser than me to decide how to deal with you. As she spoke, the girl's expression became slightly complicated. As for who it is, you don't need to know for now. Anson remained calm and didn't say anything, only glancing thoughtfully at the patterns on the door. The girl slowly walked to the door, gently grasped the copper-plated door knocker, and knocked twice. Come in. A deep, husky voice sounded from behind the door, its steady tone conveying an air of complete control. The slightly nervous girl pushed open the door, and Anson, following closely behind, entered the room at her signal. It was a very spacious study. The built-in bookshelves opposite the fireplace were filled with rows of old, faded books. A large desk occupied nearly a sixth of the space, stacks of documents and receipts arranged neatly on either side of it, separated by size and color, with a black Eber mechanical typewriter serving as a dividing line. Behind this mountain of documents sat a slightly short, stout figure. His smooth, rounded head was now adorned only with ringed temples, and his cold, stern eyes scrutinized a newspaper in his hands. He looked no different from any other taciturn old man in a cafe. Sit down. The old man put away the newspaper, placing the site he had been reading on the table. Yes, Anson nodded slightly in greeting, took a seat in the chair in front of the desk, and stared intently at the old man before him. The girl walked to the fireplace and expertly prepared coffee. Let's not stand on ceremony, Lord Anson Bach. Looking directly into Anson's eyes, the old man spoke in a deep voice. I understand the general outline of what happened tonight. For the sake of your safety and confidentiality, there are some necessary questions I need to ask you. So first, are you a member of the Old Gods faction, or have you ever had contact with any Old God group? Didn't I already say that? The girl complained softly, carrying a tray to the old man's side and placing a steaming cup of coffee within his reach. He's a graduate of the Royal Military Academy. His attendance at this gathering was just a coincidence. How could he possibly? I am. Anson interrupted abruptly, looking solemnly into the familiar eyes of the old man, and I have crucial clues about the Black Mage. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.